We then went into executive session to discuss the purchase in the Cornelius Pond. We voted to move forward with that. We also decided to have some additional discussion on the accompanying conservation restrictions so that everyone's comfortable with those restrictions, and that will be brought back then at the future meeting. We decided at the open meeting to bring the pet burial ground discussion back as an open meeting discussion, and we'll schedule that as an agenda item for next Tuesday. Monday's a holiday, so our next Board of Selectmen meeting is on Tuesday, a week from today. Michael?
Larry, I would just ask that everybody that heard that look at the agenda, because Julie and Chris make the agenda. We want to make sure that it fits in with Julie's schedule, with the budget, whatnot.
Yeah.
Just not to say it's not going to happen, but I think Julie should make that.
Make that. Okay. Let me again, because we have a new group of people here, let me read the opening statement. As required by open meeting law, you're hereby informed that the town will be video and audio taping as well as live broadcasting this public meeting. In addition, anyone in the audience who plans to video or audio tape this meeting must notify the chairman prior to the start of the meeting. Let me ask if we had to do a pledge of allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Anyone here for weekly briefing? Emily.
Good evening. Emily Mitchell, Director of the Harwich Council on Aging. I just want to give a quick update about a project we have going on. The Barnstable County Department of Human Services has been awarded a grant, a 2-year grant to study aging on Cape Cod. They're studying factors to see whether the whole region and each town individually is age-friendly and dementia-friendly. Right now is the baseline information gathering stage. They've put out a survey to track those factors. It's about a 15-minute survey. It's available both online and we have paper copies. The paper copies are at the Council on Aging, so I have some here, and they're in the office for anyone who needs them. They're being returned. We need them returned to us by February 28th, so the end of February. We're really encouraging folks to do this. The more data we have, the more we can make sure everyone is accounted for. So again, we have hard copies and we have a web address. That web address is on our website. It's on Channel 18. So we're just really encouraging as many folks as are able to fill that out.
And just as a follow-up, what's your expectation in terms of publishing the data? Or?
So it's a 2-year process. So everything's being handed back over to the Barnstable County Department of Human Services. So someone will be in my office on March 1st from there to collect the data. They have promised to give regional and town-specific data, but they haven't given me a timeline as to when to expect that. The hope is that after 2 years, they can engage in planning that will allow the Cape to become an AARP age-friendly certified community, but I don't have a more specific timeline about when data will be published.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Anyone else for weekly briefing? Public comment? Yes, ma'am.
Good evening, gentlemen. I want to welcome everyone to today being World Healing Day. So you might want to look that up. It started from Our Lady of Lourdes in France. But again, World Day of Healing. So anyway, you might remember a couple of weeks ago that I did speak, and a week or so before that, I wanted to just, as a side comment, I did read the fine print this time, and I did talk to the town administrator, Mr. Clark, and I believe wording should be added there in the italics, even if it's small print, saying that the town meetings are disseminated over YouTube, social media. So a couple of folks have told me, oh, I saw you on YouTube. I feel like I've been victimized. Hopefully I'm a survivor at this point, but what I talked about previously, I had no idea would go over social media. So as we all know, it's widely used, much more so than someone going to the local cable interconnect channel. So I'll continue, but I'll be a little more cautious and reserved. I just want to say that I'm dealing with a private matter now, as was advised at the last session that I attended. Mr. Clark was in receipt of an email by me of the circumstances of which I was barred or disallowed from speaking 2 weeks ago. But we will continue this matter privately, and I just wanted an affirmation because I did receive an appointment for this coming week from Sandy, the administrative assistant to Mr. Clark. Mr. Clark, can you just confirm that we do have a meeting this week, and hopefully you'll be in attendance with that meeting?
Yes,
with me.
we are scheduled for Thursday at 11,
Okay,
just for in my office.
thank
Okay.
you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else for a public comment or announcement? Yes, sir.
Yes, Brian Parity. Just a question on the town warrant tonight. Is that open for public comment at that point, or no?
Sure.
It is, okay. Well, I'm not sure I'll be able to stay for that, but, so I'd like to make a suggestion now. I'd like to suggest, as the Board of Selectmen review the warrant in the order of articles for the warrant, just in the order of saving time, that all of the pet burial ground articles be grouped together. Just a suggestion.
Okay. Thank you. If not, Ed, you wish to read the consent agenda?
Sure. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to present the consent agenda and move adoption of the items thereon, including approve the request for a one-day beer and wine license by the Friends of the South Harwich Meeting House for March 9th, 2019. Approve the recommendation of the town administrator for a dog hearing held on Wednesday, February 6th, 2019. We'll vote to designate the town administrator as the hearing official in the matter of a request for a dangerous dog hearing pursuant to MGL Chapter 40, Section 157.
Second.
Second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Unanimous. We next move to a public hearing of the app. You want to read the notice
Sure.
on that?
I don't have the actual public hearing statement up. Do you have it up? Public hearing.
I don't have a copy of that. Just read the agenda item then.
Okay. Agenda. Be holding a public hearing for an application for an annual common victular all alcoholic beverages license for Blue Stripe LLC DBA Cape Sea Grill at 31 C Street, Harwich Port. Jennifer Ramler, manager.
Well, Chris
Actually,
has
this
it
is
now,
the-
and I'll make
This
it.
is the formal one.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't,
Just read into the
we
record.
missed that in our
Okay.
packet, so
Notice is hereby given under Chapter 138 of the General Laws as amended that application has been made to this board for an annual common victular all alcoholic beverages license by Blue Stripe LLC DBA Cape Sea Grill, 31 C Street, Harwich Port, Mass. 02646. Jennifer Ramler, manager, on the following described premises located at 31 C Street, Harwich Port, Mass. 2,634 square feet indoor area, 2 entrances and 2 exits. The Board of Selectmen will hold a hearing upon the application on Monday, February 11th, 2019, no earlier than 6:30 p.m. in the Don B. Griffin Room at Town Hall, 732 Main Street, Harwich, at which time all interested parties will be heard.
okay. Chris, do you want to, some comments first, or?
Actually, Mr. Chairman, this is a little bit unusual, and it's probably worthwhile to comment on, that the town did last year seek special legislation in which to authorize 3 seasonal licenses to be converted from seasonal licenses to all alcohol annual licenses. Cape Sea Grill is one of the 3 that had presented that, and they are the first one to submit their application and have a hearing scheduled. So that's what this is in regards tonight. But there are 3 that have requested a conversion from seasonal to all alcohol.
And all 3 were approved by the state, so.
All 3 were approved by the
It's thrown back to us for final approval. So you wish to identify yourself and give us some
Jennifer
background?
Douglas Ramley.
And we own the Cape Sea Grill in Harwich Board.
Right.
Just, we're in front of you this evening to apply for an annual common victualler, all alcohol beverage license for our restaurant, Blue Stripe LLC, DBA the Cape Sea Grill. We've held a seasonal common victualler, all alcohol license for 16 years and an annual common victualler wine and malt beverage license for 1 year, all without incident. Currently, our all alcohol license expires on January 15th of each year. We are only able to serve wine and malt beverage until April 1st, when our all alcohol license is in effect again. During this period, we have found that many of our regular guests do not dine with us because they don't drink beer or wine. Being the months where we do need the business, we would like to offer all alcohol throughout the year to our guests. We are enjoying being a year-round restaurant in Harwich and feel that being open during the winter months adds to the vibrancy of the town.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Michael?
Open it up to the public.
I'm just giving people here a chance, and then I'll open to the public. Don? Nothing? Any comments, questions from the public? This is going to be a short hearing. If no further discussion, I'll close the public hearing and ask for a motion.
I move that we approve the application for annual common vehicular all alcohol beverages license for Blue Stripe LLC, DBA Cape Sea Grill at 31 C Street, Harwich Port.
The second?
Second.
Any further discussion? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
Next on the agenda is the town administrator's fiscal year 2020 budget message. And so, Chris, you're on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Got a little bit more going tonight than I normally do, Mr. Chairman, so let me just grab mine. So one of the requirements of the town charter is for the administrator to put together a budget that's balanced. Surprisingly, it seems like time flies. This is actually my 6th one that I've done in the time that I've been here, the FY 2020 budget. What I would like to encourage people to do, I think in total it's about 44 pages, a lot of material. Certainly tonight I'm not going to go over everything in that 44 pages, as I'm sure people are appreciative of. But I do have several slides. I wanted to make sure that I hit kind of some of the high points of the budget message, and then obviously take any questions. I would encourage people, if they want to read it, we'll have it online on the town's website, so it will be available for folks to look at. So just one of the things, and I think I started this with my very first budget message, is that, this isn't the Chris Clark formula of how to do budgeting. I have gone, and actually in some of the previous towns that I've worked in, there's a mechanism in which Standard & Poor's, S&P, referred to here, actually goes out and studies municipalities throughout the United States and other parts of the world to see what are the characteristics that you should be engaged in order to obtain a AAA bond rating, which is really the highest. A AAA bond rating has one immediate value of giving you the ability to borrow money for less because you're a lesser of a risk, so therefore the interest rate is less. But it also has elements in it that has greater viability for an organization that can deal with fiscal stresses and so on, and the ability to deal with it. I'm going to kind of just rattle through these, just focus on structural balance. They do want to make sure that when you present the budget that you have the budget where you understand where the revenue's coming from, where the expenses are coming from, and that you maintain a structural. You don't fund things that are annual for one-time revenues and so forth. Strong liquidity, meaning that if we run into some shortfall, do we have the ability to supplement our budget if we need to? We do, as a town, have strong liquidity. By state law, we cannot invest for really long-term, so our investments have to be maintained in some element of liquidity. Regular economic and revenue updates to identify shortfalls early. We do, as an organization, receive monthly finance reports on revenue and expenses from the town finance officer, so we do have that information. On economic, I do kind of monitor the reading material on the general economy of Massachusetts to see if there's any trends that could have a negative impact on us. And then I do meet with the Chamber of Commerce on a monthly basis just to kind of be aware of any individual issues that may come up. Establish a rainy day and budget stabilization reserve. I do have more slides on that, so I will get to that when we get to that part of the presentation. Prioritizing spending plans and establish contingency plans for operating budgets. I think as I've done 6 of these budgets, I've made about $1 million a year is probably the average for cuts. So that's what they're kind of getting at in terms of prioritizing. We can't do everything, especially with Proposition 2.5. We have limits to what we're able to accomplish. And then to establish contingency plans is obviously making sure that we fund things in a adequate means. Strong long-term and contingent liability management, OPEB. OPEB stands for Other Post-Employment Benefits. Health insurance, we are required as an organization to pay health insurance benefits to retirees because we've accepted various statutes. That's not uncommon at all in Massachusetts. It is uncommon in other parts of the country, so other parts of the country do not have that retirement system similar to what we have. Multi-year financial plan, we do have a requirement in the charter for the finance director and myself to do a 5-year finance plan. We usually do that in September, October, prior to the beginning of the annual budget season. Formal debt management, you'll see we do have elements where we do try to actively manage the debt, myself and the finance director, to try to take as much as we can, peaks and valleys, out of the debt. And then pay-as-you-go financing strategy for part of operating and capital budget. That is pay-as-you-go is really how we, in some ways, how we reallocate and utilize free cash. So that will be part of the overall presentation. And then a well-defined and coordinated economic development strategy. I think if there's anything that I would like to try to improve on and do a little better job at is really to do a more coordinated economic development strategy. I think we have the building blocks are there with meeting with the folks from the chamber. And then we have been reviewed already, and what they, Standard & Poor's makes the observation that we are part of a very strong economy. Harwich is strong, we have low unemployment. Strong management, they get to the management of the town, so that means the Board of Selectmen, that administration being on the same page on various issues. Strong budgetary performance, that they look at our audited financials. We have done very well in the last 5 or 6 years with our budgetary performance. Strong budgetary flexibility, building reserves gives us the ability to weather storms as we move forward, and we certainly have built reserves. I have additional slides to cover that topic. And again, very strong liquidity I referred to a little bit earlier. Very strong debt and contingency liability profile, so they want to make sure that we don't have too much debt overall, so that way we have, people probably don't want to hear this because it's definitely a lot of money that we have currently out, but we certainly are at the low end of our ability to borrow even more. I always think that you can borrow as much, but you really have to have the ability to pay. So you need to be responsible. Even though we can go significantly higher, we choose not to administratively. And then strong institutional framework. They're just looking for, do we have a consistency in the management team? I just wanted to remind folks of the graphic. Some of these graphics are going to be a little bit smaller than I would like, so I apologize in advance. But just you can see on here the towns that are AA+, which Harwich is yellow sign there. And so we are AA+. The AAA, we are surrounded by AAA communities. We have Dennis, Orleans, Brewster, Chatham, all have AAAs. So that is something that they have a little bit of a stronger financial position. I will kind of allude to a little bit in terms of our direction and where we are going. We definitely are moving in a positive direction, and in that direction of having the ability to become a AAA rated community. The bottom line is, my job is to make sure that I present a balanced budget. This year certainly was a little bit of a challenge, but with challenge was also opportunity. So there is some items in here that I think are worthwhile to give some consideration to ask the board to give some consideration to. The good news is, it is balanced, so the total revenue is $70,263,000 and some change, and the total expenditure is $70,257,000, a minor surplus of $5,721. So we intend on this presentation to kind of hit some of the budget highlights and major initiatives. This is a chart, actually, I just want to acknowledge, I probably will do it a couple times, but Carol Coppola from the finance director has helped to put a lot of these charts together. Hopefully these charts help to show things a little differently instead of just reading the text. But you can certainly see some of the trends. So we do have a trend here where salary and wages, that's more on the town side, has been trending up. Not unusual with collective bargaining agreements. And then you see the school. The school is more driven, Monomoy Regional School as well as the Cape Tech. That is more driven by educational reform formulas. So we have a formula-driven basis. And you can see on this slide here on the far end, that debt service. We have other slides that as we get into paying for wastewater and some of the other larger challenges that the town has, we have that debt service will continue to creep up. Probably not as rapidly as people think, but it is something that needs to be actively managed. One of the things that I have in the presentation, or one of the items, is to give some consideration for the board to adopt the local option room occupancy tax. I just wanted to show, and again, I thank Carol for kind of digging up this information, that there was in the law, the state law, that was given an opportunity for hotel and motel tax for a room rental rate. Has in there that you can charge up to I think originally it was 4%, and in the 1980s, we, along with most others, did do the hotel motel tax at 4%. And then in 2010, I didn't get a chance to verify this, but in conversation actually with the attorney earlier today, he thought that there was some legislative effort that when they changed from 4 to allow for a maximum of 6, that in the Cape's case, a few communities, I guess 4 in total, moved that up to 6%. So I am recommending in this budget message that we increase up to the 6%. That would go into effect as of July 1. That would be something different, kind of above and beyond in terms of what legally we can do that right now. But secondly, the state did pass a short-term room rental for non-hotels, and that would actually, instead of being 4%, which would be slated now, could be the 6% if this was voted.
Excuse me. Mr. Chair, before you go on in that subject, because it's actually daunting to us, so I can imagine what it feels like sitting in the audience. You're talking about this as if it's a tax. When it went through the legislature, there's like 3 components of things, and it's a lot more complex. This is the base level.
Absolutely. Actually,
There's
two.
stuff for affordable housing, there's an adoption for sewer possibilities, and there's layers. This is just the basic rooms tax.
Yeah, just to, that's a great point, and let me go back. Just in terms of, originally in the 80s, it was a hotel motel tax that was 4% that allowed for, as visitors come to the Cape, they have to pay a certain amount above and beyond. Cities of Boston and some of the other cities have traditionally have these room tax. They're fairly traditional in the bigger cities. They did get expanded to other parts of the Commonwealth in the 80s. Here, there's a couple things that are happening. The current state law for the hotel motel has in there that in 2010, I believe that it was increased from 4% to 6%. So now that again is just a motel or hotel stay. And recently, this past January, geez, it seems like it was a little bit longer ago, but basically it's in January, the room tax has been expanded to allow for short-term rentals in people's individual homes. A short-term rental, anything less than 14 days over a calendar year is exempt. Anything over 60 days as a continuous stay is also exempt. So anything within that 14 days to 60 days would be included in that. That is really directed not just at hotels and motels, but directed at people that do rent out their homes through vacation rentals by owner and those groups. And in that, there are three components to it. One component is that we would tax right now at 4%. That law goes into place on July 1 of 2019. And because we've already adopted this, it automatically goes in at 4%. So by going to 6, then we would automatically make that 4% 6%. There are two other additional components to that that allow for an additional fee to go on, actually 3 different components. One of the additional fees is an additional option that is regarding affordable housing, and the other one is for funding of infrastructure and I believe affordable housing. And those are not part of this budget plan to adopt either one of those local options being considered. My understanding, and I attended, I appreciate Ed invited me to a meeting on Friday. Those are additional local options that really, it sets the rules and regs for how do you describe and what falls into creating a bylaw for what is a room occupancy for a private homeowner. And then the third component to that is there's a 2.75% tax. It's already built into the law, already going to become effective on July 1.
No, March 31st.
On March 31st?
The law goes into effect.
March 31st.
The rate starts being collected on July 1st.
July 1st, thank you. And that is a 2.75% tax on top of the 4 or the 6%. That would be specifically dedicated for wastewater, and it would go into a separate entity in which that would be expended from. We could probably spend almost a whole night going through the details of that, but just to provide
As long as
an
they know that this is
overview,
more than
I
that.
appreciate the opportunity.
Just to comment, the two other options that you talked about are in the law are called local impact fees.
Local impact fees.
And one could be collected, it's a 1.5%, could be collected on short-term rentals that are professionally managed and are in multi-unit buildings, apartment houses.
Yes.
And the second one is also 1.5%, and those would go into effect on short-term rentals that are owner-managed in duplexes or triplexes. And these two, quite honestly, these two provisions were put into the law to deal with some of the significant problems that cities like Boston are having with people coming into an apartment building, renting 10 apartments, and basically starting to run a hotel.
Right.
And if that's going to happen, the law allows them to collect extra funds, and that money needs to go into either infrastructure or affordable housing. And on the other hand, a lot of the traditional lower income or affordable housing, which is owner-occupied duplexes, are now being operated more like rooming houses or bed and breakfasts, and this allows cities like Boston to gain additional revenue to provide for affordable housing resources to be developed. In discussions with other selectmen on Cape Cod, the general sense is that there is no interest on Cape Cod for adopting any of the two local impact fees.
Yeah, I think that, you know, that's the same reaction I've kind of received too, and I think if that's something that would be done in the out years as we move forward, not something that would be tackled now.
Well, in a town like Harwich, we have to actually have a stock of apartment houses. We don't really have.
Just kind of moving on, 'cause there's still a fair amount of material to kind of get through, but on free cash, just for folks that may not be familiar with municipal government, it's probably not the best terminology they ever use, but free cash is really, it's a derivative that comes as we estimate revenues at the beginning of, like, this budget is being balanced now in February. We won't collect the first dollar on this until July 1 and spend the first dollar, or spend out the first dollar until, last dollar, until June 30th of 2020. So it does have a requirement that you have to kind of look forward to see. So on the revenues, we generally estimate revenues a little bit low, so we get some revenues back. And then we also get, if there's budget turn back, that also becomes part of free cash. Sometimes people know it as a excess deficiency account, or retained earnings is probably another term of art that people at home may be a little bit more familiar with. What I've tried to do in the spending plans that I have, we have had kind of a healthy free cash in 3 of the last 5 years. We're just shy of 3.5 million. So you can see here that we have just under 1.5 for capital items. So these are items that we would pay cash for, in essence, and not have to borrow money for. We do put some of this money towards the operating budget. In terms of Monomoy has a capital plan that we fund their capital plan, our assessment of it, our portion of the assessment of it, at the $260,000 is provided for in this plan. And I will comment a little bit on, they have a special ed situation that has come up, and I'm looking at potentially using $175,000 to help over the hump of that. Snow and ice, I knew as soon as I put this number, I reduced this number down, there'd be a forecast of snow in the forecast, and sure enough, that's happened. But I have 325 that was at 500,000. OPEB, as I alluded to, is a obligation of the town of other post-employment benefits, health insurance, and retirement. And we do have an obligation to fund that. We're supposed to fully fund it at some point, but more have a plan to fund, and I do have additional material on that as we go. The cultural center, we have a subsidy of $125,000. I think that is probably the 6th year of doing that. The good news on the cultural center is we now generate more revenue from that operation than we do provide the subsidy. So that has come a long way. The stabilization, this is adding money to our existing stabilization account, $384,000. And then some of these other ones are kind of small ones that have traditionally been funded, Chamber of Commerce, Library, Cultural. We do fund a little bit of the small capital items in the budget. And then this year, I also included in a wastewater county fund of $100,000 to help people that are in the phase 2 of the sewer project to have an ability to borrow money through the county at a lesser percentage. So the initial funding for that would be $100,000. And then the last is Pleasant Bay grant. The board had previously approved that, our portion of that, and then we have a provision for unpaid bills. So we do utilize the free cash element or excess and deficiency in that various way. Just as folks can see, this is just kind of a pie chart that shows how things are broken out. Obviously, the larger part of this is the education, and then public safety are 2 of the bigger pieces for where the money goes. And then employee benefits, health insurance is also a kind of large component. I just wanted to get into a little bit just to explain, and this is some of the text right out of the budget message itself. The Monomoy assessment for the town of Harwich for FY 2020 is 4.47%, and FY 19 was 3.99%, and 18 was 4%. So you can see that those are high numbers in total. For this year, I just wanted to make sure that we kind of address some of these a little bit differently. So two reasons for why they're higher this year than they have been in the past. The first is special education. Sometimes there are special education costs that come in. So in the budget, they had to provide for, which they had not previously, $430,000. Administration does plan in this budget to spend $175,000 from free cash. Normally, you wouldn't spend free cash, but in this case, I believe this is a one-time extraordinary effort. And really, what do I mean by that is that the state law has a special ed funding formula for when you have one-time extraordinary efforts. So the system will apply for that to see if they're able to get that. And then secondly, there is a circuit breaker program, and I do appreciate Scott Carpenter, the superintendent, spending some time with me kind of going through the circuit breaker program. But our obligation is that we have to come up with the first $70,000 or $35,000 per student, and then they will reimburse the kind of the balance of that. Unfortunately, in this budget cycle, that reimbursement won't occur until the FY21 cycle. So we anticipate that the amount that we would get from the additional circuit breaker that won't come in until FY21 would be about $175,000. So that's kind of the idea behind this, is to come up with that extra money, the $175,000 in the first year, pending the state funding coming in. If we were to come up with that out of taxpayer money and then the state were to fund that too, that gets built into the formula, and that becomes a part of our new base moving forward. The second component to this is really, and the one that I think is really driving the issue in the first place, is the Chapter 70 Foundation budget formula. They have two factors that they take into account. The first is what they call the municipal revenue growth factor, and that is how much revenue has the town, both Harwich and Chatham in this case, how much has your revenue gone up from year to year, and if our revenue goes up about 4%, then the expectation is the school budget would be allowed to go up by 4%. So that's one part. Harwich and Chatham came in pretty similar, right around that 4% number. And the second factor, which is much more relevant, and I have a lot more write-up in the material on this, is that the formula is based upon the current year school-age children in Harwich and Chatham. The bottom line is Harwich overall had an increase of about 50 children according to the October 1st, 2018 census, compared to a decrease of almost 10 children in Chatham. So this 60-person swing leads the state formula to have Harwich increase by 4.47, or $1.1 million, and Chatham actually decreased because of the decrease in school-age children. A modest number, but still it was a decrease of $32,000. So those numbers in the formula have a significance to us as an organization. This is just, I think at last week's meeting, Mr. Carpenter, the superintendent, went over the Monomoy assessment, so this is just the assessment broken out. We do have in our assessment where there's a 3-year rolling average that takes into account some of the changes in the enrollments, and in the state formula, it's a per year basis, so we get kind of hammered a little bit more by the state formula when you have fluctuations on a year-to-year basis. This is just a graphic that kind of shows overall. You can see the enrollment numbers for Monomoy have held fairly steady, but certainly Harwich is a big component of the overall system. I wanted to put in the Cape Tech School, and this is what makes budgeting a little bit challenging. Yeah, the same formula applies to the tech school as it does to Monomoy, because they're both regional systems. And you could see that in FY19, we had 77 kids. It's anticipated for the tech school that we'll have 67. Again, that's based on the October 1 projected enrollments. And in this case, the enrollment actually went down by 10. And this wound up where our assessment for the Cape Tech School went down by 159,000, so a 10% drop, which is a good drop. But you can see overall they had a decrease. I think it was 21 students in general went down in total system-wide, or 24. So we were part of the overall decline in students. That's where our savings comes in. I would remind people that in FY20 is the first year of the bond payment for the school project at Cape Tech. The townspeople in Harwich did vote to do that as a debt exclusion, so that will be built into the taxes. But that's a significant amount starting to come online. The good news is they had borrowed that money. They had anticipated a 5% borrowing. It came in at 3%, so they had a significant decrease in that. And the state formula changed where they were able to get a determination, and about $5 million in additional money from the state that wasn't anticipated was included. So even though these are bigger numbers, they were able to have a few of those mitigating factors to try to help to decrease the overall impact. And this is just this is the 2019 assessment. And in the 2019 assessment, I just wanted to kind of show this, because we had 77 in 18, 77 in 19, so no enrollment change. But because the overall number went down by 30 students, we ended up last year at a 6.3% increase. So here you have a budget that's fairly level. Our enrollments didn't change, but because the overall enrollments dropped, we had a 6.3% increase. And you look at a 10% drop this year, and last year was a 6.3% increase. And that's a big swing to try to budget for, quite honestly, these changes. And this is just more the message, and I think I have another slide on this. You can kind of see Cape-wide, there is a couple of factors going on. But this is the Cape Tech enrollment in 2016. They had 654 students, and in FY20, 570. So overall, there is a trend of decreasing school-age children on the Cape. In this slide, there was several requests for what we call enhanced level of services. So there are several different items here for the requests, about 330,000. I'm not going to read through each of these. The only three that we factored into the budget was a citizen self-serve module. So we're splitting some of that cost with water. So that's a IT and treasurer item that we wanted to put in. The IT, we had a report done, and certainly the justification for a network administrator. The 69,000 in here, we have built in, actually in the FY19 budget, there was 40,000 built into IT. We did not rebudget the 40,000 for continuing with that. We built it into this number. So we wanted to try to net that number out a little bit. So it's actually 39,000 plus obviously benefits that would have to be built in, but there was 40 built into the budget that we did not rebuild that in. We put it towards this. The Council on Aging, we did take a position on the Council on Aging. One of the things that as the school-age population goes down, the senior population is going up. So to try to address some of that issue, we did allocate about 8 additional hours for a program specialist down at the Council on Aging. Some of the major initiatives and themes, I'm not going to go through each of these ones, I'm just going to kind of touch upon, but maintain and enhance levels of service, educational opportunities, human resources, where are we with collective bargaining and benefits, comprehensive wastewater management plan, financial management relative to our capital debt and reserves. And then I have added, last year I had 5, I added the 6 housing, and really the strong need for the Affordable Housing Trust that the townspeople did vote last year. Just overall, in a budget perspective, that I think when we have a cycle where we could probably add 1 or 2 positions, provided that local receipts continue to grow, even if they grow modestly, and costs such as health insurance are modest. In years in which revenues are tepid and health insurance costs are bordering on double digits, I mean, we really can't do that. You just can't maintain that same level. For education, I've alluded to that a little bit already. On the human resources, I just wanted to put in a slide for the positions and where the groupings are of the employees. You can see that they have grown somewhat. I think we had about 10 positions over the last 6 years that have been contemplated in these budgets. But overall, out of almost 200 people, that's not a significant increase. And where you have some of those school-age kids don't have costs relevant to the education, you still have seasonal rentals. So we have a housing stock that probably accommodates almost 30,000 people, even though we have a year-round population of 12,000. Just on the collective bargaining, I think we're in a good position. We have several of our collective bargaining agreements, or all the collective bargaining agreements in the current fiscal year. The current fiscal year is FY19, so every one of them has been settled. For FY20, we have 5 out of the 8 units, collective bargaining units settled. We are in negotiations with 3, and those negotiations are progressing. The personnel bylaw is all the non-union people in the community, and that's not something that would go out years. That's voted on an annual basis. Just on health insurance, I wanted to talk a little bit about health insurance. Really, one of the things that made this budget a little bit more palatable, I thought this was going to be the year that we may have to ask for a general override, but we had 18 months of pretty good claims history. So on our health insurance, and we're part of the Cape Cod Municipal Health Group. So overall, we've had historically good, really 18 months, and we have not been spending at a level that we had previously. What that's allowed for is for active employees that there's a 0 rate adjustment. So when you have almost a $5 million budget and you're initially budgeting almost 10%, and you go down from 10% to 0, that has a significant positive value for the overall budget. On the comprehensive wastewater management plan, I just wanted to refer to that a little bit. There's really not too much on for the warrant for this coming year. Phase 2, though, just to kind of give an opportunity to give people an update on that. The design and regulatory approvals are underway. The state revolving loan fund has approved a 0% increase. So on some of the projections, we were using a 2% increase because that's what has been required. But because we have a regional effort with Chatham, and because there's a focus on nitrogen reduction, we're at 0%. And that savings over the life of the borrowing of almost 30 years, if we borrow $25 million, the savings is close to $25 million. So it's a significant number in terms of that, and a great accomplishment really for the organization overall. We do have in here on the, we have to build up, there won't be enough people hooked into the system for the IMA, the intermunicipal agreement with Chatham. So we do need to continue to build up a funding source. So when we start to pay into Chatham, that we have a contingency that it would allow for us to really kind of supplement the amount of money that we have. So in here, that supplement is to build up hopefully from 150,000 to up to almost 300,000 by 2022. So 2 additional years, because our assessment from Chatham will be in that neighborhood of 250,000. We will collect obviously fees from the sale of sewer, but that won't be enough to cover. So what I've actually advocated for in here is to take some of the money out of the 150. We just need to build that up within the tax base. We do have the ability to spend some. So I know the board had a real priority of trying to have a program administrator. So we do have that funded for out of that, with the idea that we continue to build up that amount. And then we do have 2 issues that have come up. Our efforts with DHY, the grant runs out in, our grant for those efforts runs out in June of 19. So I have put in a modest amount to kind of keep those negotiations going, because I think they will take an additional year. And then also, if the CWMP, through the efforts of DHY, is the Dennis Harwich Yarmouth effort to do more regional work, in which some of the savings in that is close to $40 million that we're looking at. But in order to do that, we also have to update our comprehensive wastewater management plan, that CWMP, and that would be about a $25,000 effort to do that. Those are both kind of one-time costs, the thought in this budget process. And then I referenced earlier the $100,000 from free cash for the county septic loan program. Just on the housing issue, again, I want to thank Scott Carpenter, the superintendent, for kind of having a discussion. He provided me with some of this information that if you take the 2010 census, just to give people an idea of some of the things that I think, I don't want to say necessarily, hopefully not upcoming attractions, but potential upcoming attractions, that here in 2017, you had Cape Towns, so you take from 2010 to 2017, you had some towns that had 24% in Truro, which were year-round residents. So home for year-round residents, 24. So that means for 3 out of 4 people were summer residents, with 6 out of the 15 towns at below 50%. So, you know, and I don't want to make this certainly summer residents are an important part of our budgeting, an important part of our economy. Really what this shows, though, is that it does have an impact in terms of school-age kids. It does have an impact in terms of funding education. So the town side may need additional resources because we have those summer rentals and summer properties. But education, as education, the school-age population continues to drop, I think there has to be some realization that as you have lesser students, there has to be some adjustments made in the education budget. Hopefully modest and slow, but we need to be reflective of the trend. And the trend line really for the reduction is, it's worse in all but 2 towns. So every town had this, only 2 of them didn't have, I think they both had modest increases with Wellfleet and Bourne in terms of that. And then just for bringing it a little bit local, from 2010, the average overall was 1.6 with a low of 1.6% decrease, with a high of a negative 18.7 units lost. The amount reduction in Harwich was 3.7, and the Chatham reduction was 4.1. So more homes are going to summer use and not year-round use. And really that's the kind of the point of the slide there, just to kind of make sure that people are aware that that trend has been going on for a period of time, and it does have ramifications to the overall budget. I'm going to go through these kind of quick. I've historically shown these, just what the percentage overall of the increase is and the tax base. You'll see in 2014, I think there was almost $1 million, just shy of $1 million. So the in an override, so you see where that went up to almost 7% in that year. But generally, we're in the 3 to 4% range of budget growth that's allowed by Proposition 2.5. This just kind of breaks them out into the base levy limit, the 2.5 limit, and then the debt exclusions. You can see the debt exclusions are the yellow. So we do fund a fair amount of our operations, such as like the sewer project, out of debt excluded funds. The Cape Tech School was done out of debt excluded, and Monomoy was also done out of debt excluded. So you can see that we have historically had a reliance upon some of those funding sources in order to operate the large capital projects. We did have an issue in 2016 where we had excess levy capacity, and we were able to factor that out over. Excess levy capacity just means that we didn't fund all the way to 2.5. We have historically kept it fairly modest, so we are back to that trend. But we were able to capture a couple years of having some rate stability by utilizing that excess capacity over a 3-year period of time or 2-year period of time. Select budget data. This is just, in the past, I've been asked for just the percentages. So if we have public safety, for every dollar that we spend on average wages, what is the support element? What is the fringe benefits that go with it? We range from about 39% on public safety to 45% public works, 41% for admin and clerical, and water is 47%. So you get a sense for some of these. One of the main drivers is just the workers' comp. Workers' comp tends to be a element that some of these jobs are more dangerous than others. You'll notice that IOD is injured on duty, so police and fire actually fall under a separate statute in law. So that's why that number is a little bit different. And then to get into the debt structure, what I wanted to really show on here was with all the debt that's being talked about, so what we have here is the debt that's already been voted, so already on the books, debt such as the sewer project that we're planning for, that has been authorized, but we're just waiting for the project to go. And then we do have out years in the capital budget items that will need to be funded over the next 7 years. So we do try to capture those, and as we get updated information, we try to make those adjustments. So you can see that if you take an average home, which we did figure, or the median home, and the median home is you take the highs and the lows off, and you get somebody right in the middle. That has been adjusted to $375,000. We had previously used $350,000. The average home, or the median home, is now at $375,000. And you can see in 19, we're just shy of $500 towards the tax bill that goes. And with some of the approvals already, we're up over $600,000. But it doesn't have, giant spikes. So that's when I referred to earlier about trying to have a level of consistency. It's still going up. I mean, you can't take some of these projects and have them be no impact. But when you do have debt that falls off, such as like the Monomoy debt, you can kind of capture some of that to lessen the impact on newer debt coming on. So you can see that I think that caps out around $700. So the range is from $500 to $700 in terms of some of these. So even though it is a significant amount, the sewer that we approved last year at $25 million, those numbers are built into these numbers. This is just a grand total of the amount, so you can see in terms of the dollar figures. So we have about over $6 million and getting closer to probably $9 million in those. And then on the water department, water is an enterprise fund, so everything that the water department does is funded through their fees. So we tend to treat them financially as a independent organization within the town finances. So this is a look at their water debt service. Capital budget, there are a few items I mentioned earlier, about $50,000 that comes out of free cash. That's really IT equipment and, primarily IT-related equipment, so you can see that. There are 2 debt exclusions that are built into this budget. And one is the 5-year road maintenance program that we have historically had in there. That number has been about $700,000 for the last 6 years. Every year I've been here, it's been about that level. And then on the Lower County Road project, which is not a TIP funding, no TIP funds are built into this. It is at $4.5 million. If you look at the capital plan, it says $5.5 million. We have made a decision in-house administratively that we will use $1 million of our Chapter 90 allocation, the $700,000, and some of the debt exclusion towards trying to decrease the cost impact of that. So we are trying to be sensitive to having, and this is probably one of the lowest years of debt exclusion requests, probably almost all the time I've been here. So it is a low year. This is just where the funding, you can see the 2 main funding sources, or 3 main funding sources. The debt exclusion is up there. And the debt exclusion doesn't mean it's paid off in 1 year. That would be paid off over a portion of time, so it could be over 20 years. So that's just the amount borrowed for that 1 year. But you can see the free cash at the 1.5, Chapter 90 at the 700,000. These are just the requests by department, so you get a sense for what the departments are looking at. And some of these numbers do have built into them. I think, for instance, I believe it's 23. We have $5 million or $6 million coming from the state for a TIP project for West Harwich on Route 28. So sometimes this is grant money that is given to the community or planned for by the community. I'm not even going to try that. That looked terrible when I was doing it, and it came out worse. This is just every item that is part of that $1.4 million. So my apologies. And then just the breakdown on the total capital budget, you can see it's $4.4 million. I do want to say, too, I know my chairman is here of the Capital Outlay Committee. I have made some adjustments, and the Capital Outlay Committee is planning on having a meeting to go over that. So what you see presented to you this evening is administration requests, and has not yet been fully vetted by the Capital Outlay Committee. But just to kind of walk people through, so free cash, obviously I've alluded to that already. Community preservation, 822,000. The cemetery revenue, 161. The debt exclusion. So you get a sense for what some of those items are. On community preservation, there was a total request of 822,000, and they did vote to fund all those requests. They do have available to them $2.2 million, and certainly appreciate the cooperative spirit that the Community Preservation Committee has had this year and last year. This just is some of those projects, in terms of what's being sought in the funding. Maybe I'll just hit one or two of the highlights. The housing funding, the Affordable Housing Trust is one of the major ones at $340,000. And then Brooks Academy rehabilitation of that under historic, $130,000. And just to remind folks that under the CPC, community preservation, it's restricted to what you can use that on. It's open space, housing, and recreation, and what am I missing? Historical, thank you. There's only three. Recreation doesn't have its own bucket. It's technically just included in that. Reserve fund balances, just to kind of show where we are. This is actually, I was hoping that when we had Standard & Poor's came in, that they would let us get to a AAA. And what they did is they moved the bar on us. So this is a 10% line. So you can see that we're at about 10% for the AA. So we have been kind of consistently around that a few years where we've been down, not in that area that we want to be at. And then in order to be a AAA rated community, they've actually moved it up to above 12%. So you can see that we have, now just in this year, 19, we're in that range. And what they said to us is, congratulations that you're getting closer, but we want to see more of an established track record of in that range for an extended period of time. Really, the items that count in this is free cash, stabilization, and OPEB. And when I say that counts for Standard & Poor's, that's what they count. They count these items. This just shows in a dollar amount. I just want to kind of highlight a little bit. You can see where stabilization, the last couple of years, we've really been able to build for that. So if we do hit a recession like we had in 2008, and I was in management during the recession in 2008, having reserves is definitely something that's needed to weather those storms. But we have done a good job of building those reserves, and the OPEB liability, the other post-employment benefits, the health insurance and retirement, that fund you could see was fairly stagnant for quite a bit. And now we've been able to kind of take off and really start to put some effort towards that. This just shows the free cash numbers, just to give people a sense that we have kind of the last several years. But I did add this next slide because it looks like, well, we're kind of really out of whack. And when you look, we're actually, we had a period of time, well before I was here, I've only been here for 5 years, but we did have times in which the free cash was higher. So we're kind of going back to that trend of being at a little bit of a higher level to use to build those reserves. That's 45
Very good,
minutes.
Chris.
Oh my goodness.
Last slide.
So I would encourage people, if you want, additional, but any questions, I'm happy to try to field what I can now.
What I'd like to do is open up for questions first from the board, then I'll entertain questions from the audience. Don?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One is a comment, one's a question, but let's start with the question. I'm confused. We keep bandying about the impact on the tax rate for somebody with a median home price of, it's been $350, $375, but we had the assessor say to us a few weeks ago that it was $4 something.
I think they said it was as high as 5. When you take the
Yeah.
average, the reason why we're taking the median is that you could have houses along the shoreline that are $4-5 million, and then houses in the interior that are selling at 300 and 400,000. And by taking the median, we're trying to eliminate some of the high end and some of the low end and get something that's more traditional for average year-rounder.
The reason I bring that up is because somebody, first of all, I'm not sure if I went house shopping, I'd be finding a plethora of $350,000 and $375,000 houses right now. But
I know one vote that was in that range.
okay, but I assure you that the people who pay their taxes aren't paying them by percentage of what they represent in the whole constellation of homes in Harwich. They pay them in dollars. I kind of feel like we're mitigating the impact on them for the borrowing, which goes back to the statement I wanted to make. Ultimately, all these charts and graphs are great, but we're going to realize as this process goes along that there's substantial money that we voted to approve for projects that has yet to see the light of day in somebody's tax bill. So everything that we're adding, even if it's commendable that we're putting the brakes on,
But it is built into those numbers.
got it, but they haven't paid it yet. So they're not feeling the pain of whatever that, because that's not a speculative rate. That's an actual per household amount that's not there yet. So ultimately, my concern is as we approve new things, even though we're slowing down on what we're asking for, those new things are compounded not against today's tax bill, but against the tax bill that they eventually will receive for the things they've already approved that have not hit yet, especially the 24 million for the Chatham
Well, that
sewage.
$200 increase builds into the Chatham costs and some of those other costs. So that $200 is the expectation.
But
of what people
nonetheless, they
should
have not paid it out of their taxes to
But it
this
is
point.
represented in the figures that Chris showed us on
I know,
the
but as
current
we-
debt and, I
My
mean,
point was that as we discuss our budget, we have to recognize that
recognize
people are
that-
looking at something that they're paying today that doesn't represent the
we
true
have to use
cost
the
of.
information, I agree, but at least it's presented graphically. Ed?
Well, it's true, the wastewater bonds that were approved haven't hit the tax rate yet, but quite honestly, by the time those projects, or at least phase 3 is complete, and we're ready to put those bonds on the tax rate, we will be able to supplant that with taxpayer-paid debt with the funding from the wastewater trust that is just starting up.
Yeah, this really is a worst-case scenario, and if we get, which we will get, because money that's generated in Harwich by statute has to be spent or allocated to Harwich again. So if we were to generate $1 million, then we could use that to pay down debt to, again, help to lessen some of the tax impact on residents.
Okay.
Point of order, is
Don?
that really true? Because we've been discussing that this is going to be
It's not, the
put
problem with
into a
budgeting,
pool countywide.
the problem is, it's difficult to handle from a budget perspective, because it's supposed to be spread out equitably, and so we're not sure what that number will be. Our hope is that will happen, and we'll get our fair share.
Well, that
We'll
was what I
get
was-
some.
That was what I was
but
arguing.
But it's hard
is
to build into an absolute number
It
at
may
this
be
point.
tethered to exactly what
It-
we're spending, but
That,
it
or
doesn't have to be.
what's going on in other towns, so on, but we should, I think we'll depend on that committee to be sure we get our fair share. Anything else, Ed?
No, that's,
Michael?
Chris, is the town getting a Medicare reimbursement this year?
We don't get Medicare reimbursement anymore. There was a element where they called it there was a donut hole, and when we actually changed, not just we, but Cape Cod Municipal Health Group, many of the cities and towns included in that, changed, so we get a lesser of an amount. So instead of getting that as a form of a check, we get that in a net reduction in our retiree costs for healthcare.
And what
That
was,
was about 3 or 4 years ago that we did that.
do you remember what health insurance costs were last year? 10% increase? was it roughly?
Actually, it ended up at 6% last year.
What was that dollar amount, roughly?
Probably 250,000.
Okay.
Roughly.
The, you know, to Don's point on the borrowing, you know, and with what Ed just said, I hope that we're not projecting what's gonna happen with that water fund. There's no board set up yet. There's nothing set
There's
up
nothing
yet.
in the assumptions for that.
Right. And then the assumption that the 2% that you're recommending at 2%, we're still gonna have that conversation, the additional tax that goes to the rental tax from 4 to 6%, we're gonna have that
Yes,
conversation as a
absolutely.
board?
Yep,
Yep, yep.
absolutely.
And then I think the number you missed on that is we're also getting a 5.7% taxed from the state that we're gonna have to charge these businesses as well.
Yes.
The
So
state tax.
if we approve all of these taxes, we're gonna be asking for 14.45% from the people that own these inns, and so I hope we give them due consideration on whether we're gonna raise it or not.
It's higher than that, actually,
The,
because you have 2.75 to that.
I think it's 14.45 total, but we don't have to go.
Yeah.
it's only 14.45 total if you add the additional 2.5% local impact fees.
It's 5.7 plus 6% plus
Plus
2.75%.
Okay,
That's what's guaranteed.
okay.
Okay. You know, Chris, last year we went to the town and we said, we're gonna pass $30 million worth of debt exclusions on top of our $68 million budget. And now we're up to over 70 million, and we're proposing another 6.732 million in spending on top of that. And I know Lower County Road got pushed off, and I've asked for it to be put on the agenda so this board can decide whether we want to hit the taxpayers with another $5 million project, $5.2 million project before it goes out to bid. And then I noticed in the warrant draft that we're looking for $100,000 to study another $4.5 million project for next year. So at some point, until all of this starts to hit the taxpayers, to Don's point, I think it might be time that we put the brakes on a little bit. That's all.
It's definitely tough choices. I mean, I don't dispute that at all.
I have a couple questions, Chris. I guess to the point of 2 versus 4% increase, or I'd be interested to know what the expectation is in dollar amount, revenue coming in, if we were to get that
You mean from 4 to 6?
4 to 6,
It's
rather than 2%.
367,000.
Okay. And including, Michael, to your...
That's just the 4 to 6.
Right.
That doesn't take into account any of the new money from the.
Right, I was interested in that, just the increase
And
from
that's
4 to 6.
only on our current revenue.
On our current revenue,
Mo-
not on the
hotel and
Airbnb.
motel.
Right.
That's
But
correct.
that'll be discussion, has to come back, because that's go to town meeting as well, so
Mhm.
that'll be a good discussion. Michael, you questioned the Lower County Road expenditure. I want to throw into that pot for agenda item, the funds that I think are in your budget for the 130, is it 137 and Old Chatham Road, to do some rework there.
Yeah, that was, I think we had a warrant article for it, and that is not recommended in this funding plan.
Okay, so you've already taken that out.
Yeah, I'm not
so I wanted to
recommending that.
question
Not that it's not needed, but there's just not.
Well,
money.
it was desirable, but they said it wasn't off action, so I was
Correct.
having a hard time justifying that. I had a question on the, well, I have one on your, just directionally on your budget message, where you're talking about potentially putting in, that we could add 1 to 2 people per year.
Mhm.
I would like to directionally change that discussion somewhat, to look at, we need to grow with what we do for people, but it's not always people. There's technical, there's IT, there's other, rather than just people. For instance, you pulled out, and I'm not arguing the reasons for pulling it out, but some additional IT to help finance on Munis and on, some better use of the tracking software and finance.
Mhm.
That I wonder if that were put back in, would that save us adding people later on, and other steps like that? I'm just suggesting that instead of the budget that we're gonna plan on adding people, whether it's a plan on adding resources, that there's staffing, there's also other items that maybe we should should change that message to what we're looking at.
Yeah, we do try to utilize as much as we can technology, but
Right.
it's limited when you have
And
22
I'm just saying, I
different
would soften that number of people, and if that'd be my recommendation. I have a question about the Monomoy School reference, that if I read this right, you're pulling out out of free cash to pay some capital items in the spatial ed.
Correct.
Why is that not that just straight included in the Monomoy budget? We'd still pay it, you know, because we get the proportion, but be a little more straightforward in what people understand Monomoy's budget to be and our budget to be, rather than pull that out so we have Monomoy and then we're actually separately adding to the Monomoy budget. It would just make a more straightforward discussion.
Yeah,
Someone else can answer that for me?
I just think in terms of, you know, I kind of alluded to, we have gotten into the track record, if you would, in the time I've been here, of funding their capital requests the way we fund our capital requests from free cash. That does get built into the formula. I think on the special ed issue, you know, I'm concerned that if we were to fund that, not out of free cash, but try to build that into the tax rate, that is gonna need some work on our side to make that work, number one. But then they'll have the full 430 available, and then when circuit breaker will kick in some nature and form. Now it's 430 plus 175, and
My other point is, it leaves the impression of trying to hide the ball or hide the wicket of having it separated rather than just straightforward school budget. I got two people who are going to answer that for me. Ed?
Well, it's sort of like the rules about the snow and ice fund. You know, we normally don't budget for what we think it's gonna cost, we budget under it, and then pay out of free cash the overage. Because if the rules are, if you budget and you ramp it up, then you're stuck up there.
No.
And you know, if we budget the Monomoy special ed when it hits a peak, then we're stuck at that as part of their base.
But I'm just saying that communication-wise, they could do the same thing with their E&D budget. You know, it just is kind of like, it can be perceived as being a little cute with how we budget for the school. Don?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to do the counterbalance to
Yeah,
that part of
yeah.
the discussion. To minimize it, as if it were a free cash single event, is also not really being totally honest, because unless I'm misunderstanding this, to the extent that the family still lives in Harwich, they contribute the student to the district, and that person does not become remarkably better that can allow them to come back and get mainstreamed, we're going to own that person until their graduating year.
That's correct.
So it is not a year or a 2-year thought, unless there's a dramatic improvement. If they went into sped, say, in the 8th grade, it wouldn't be 1 year and we're done. It would be until they graduate or they move.
That wasn't the point of that. Really, I recognize that, and that in these cases, it is a 5 or 6 year commitment that we're making. What I'm saying in this is the first year, there's very little opportunity for state funding to backfill. So the 430 is on us for the first year. The 175 we anticipate would come as circuit breaker in FY21 and continuing for the duration of time that those children are in our system.
So it wouldn't be as much, and Ed's right.
Yeah.
The spike goes down,
Yeah.
but it's not as little as it's just 1 year.
No.
It's somewhere in between.
I'm just trying to take the edge off a little bit of the
Okay.
funding, is the intent behind that. Circuit breaker will take over where the.
But not
town-
100% of what needs
not
to be paid.
100%.
Yeah, I'd caution us all to say that this is a one-time expense too. Scott Carpenter corrected me when I said one-time event. We get more special needs next year, this is a 2-time event, or
Yep.
3-time event. So I don't want to refer to it as a one-time event. And then free cash, Chris, if we could go back to free cash. On your chart and your graph, the graph basically shows a 6% across the board. And I know that the board has a 6 to 7% policy, as Carol Capola told us, I think last week or the week before. We're hitting 11%. Three out of the 5 years, we're 11% or more on free cash.
Right.
And, you know, I would urge you to really look at this budget and not have the increases in the budget to build free cash, because it seems like all we're doing is pulling things out of what should be in budgets to pay for them in free cash. Now, not OPEB or snow and ice or stabilization, but we're pulling a lot of capital items out of the capital plan and a lot of things out of budgets and paying for them with free cash. But our budget's going up that much every year.
Yeah, just on that, and I thought Carol did an outstanding presentation the other night on this. And, you know, her presentation, that there's 4 components to free cash. Obviously, you know, I'm trying to cover a lot of material, so I'm kind of going over things a little bit quickly. There's one policy that says 10% just on the revenue side. There is no policy on what gets turned back, because you don't know what the turnbacks are, because it depends upon turnover and so on. But then there's non-recurring revenue that comes in that they do not, DOR does not allow us to take that into account. One of those is on the tax foreclosure account. So I can't budget that. I cannot put that into any of the assumptions. We know that something's coming, but legally they say I can't do that. So that comes in, and depending upon how the year is. And then the 4th category is if we have a one-time event. I always think of if you get like a FEMA reimbursement or something, that's a one-time revenue. So the fact that we were at 3.5 is not a byproduct that we had the revenues too low. It's really a byproduct of the 4 different components that make up free cash.
I appreciate that, Chris, but 3.492 million, 3.576 million, 4.23 million, 2 million, our free cash number out of 5 years, most of them are 2 million or higher. So I would urge you to really look at. I
We are
understand the
trying to
one-time.
bring that down, so.
Chris, just one other comment. You mentioned workers' comp and how that's high. I think, because we do have, you know, departments that are high risk in terms of accidents. I think it would be good to focus on safety and training and having how we do that townwide with measures and goals to see if we can bring that down. It seems to me that we have this discussion without really, it's not to say people are not taken seriously, but I think as a town, we could make that a priority to look at what we could do to drive that down, whether it's procedures, training, equipment, but then with specific measures and, you know, and some goals. So maybe a couple years from now, we can say we've helped save some money.
Yeah, just to put that in context, I did have the folks from Maya come out, and we had a conversation about that. And really, similar to kind of with health insurance, that we've had, if you want to use numbers, I always think it's good, because it's a good illustration, that on workers' comp, if we spend $1, you know, if they're spending $1 plus in claims, then our rating, our experiences are going to go up. The reality is, over the last 3 years, they count a 3 years, so they do a blended average. We had 2 years that we were in the 50 cents out of a dollar, and we had 1 year we were at $1.30. So we had one bad year that will fall off. So we do have a safety committee. We actually have OSHA came into effect for, actually as of February 1. So we are making a more concerted effort. But once in a while, you just have bad claims that come in. But just so, I don't want people to think this is a, you know, a dangerous place to work. I mean, the reality is, for even that 3-year cycle, we had one bad year, and that could be 1 or 2 bad claims even, and that the other years have been more traditionally sound. So as we move forward, I think you'll see some of those claims begin to, or that cost increase will continue to moderate as our experience gets better.
And I think just to continue that, some measures and goals would help that as well.
Yeah, we do have that in
Yeah,
the
good.
performance evaluation.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Chris? Anyone, public questions? Rich?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman?
I'm Rich Larry, as the chairman of Capital Outlay. Great presentation. It was a graduate course in municipal finance. I've been on the Capital Outlay Finance Committee, chairman, vice chairman for 10 years, and I always hear about the AAA bonding being classified as that, and there look like 3 elements. I don't know if we can control each element, and I know your last discussion was the 3rd element. It shocked me to see the map and the towns surrounding us, of which one is in financial jeopardy, now is rated AAA. I would ask the board and my fellow colleague, Mr. DaCosta from the Finance Committee, to find if in fact there's a methodology to help to monitor, to set goals to get to AAA. Because we're looking at a forecast of 10 or 15 years. And if it's that important to get the AAA, to lower the cost of borrowing, and yet we want to cut borrowing, if you cut the cost of borrowing, you achieve something. So maybe the Finance Committee and the Capital Outlay Committee can work on that. But I think that should be certainly a goal. I don't know where it sets in your...
Chris?
Yeah, just to that, I think it's interesting that if you look, FY11, we had a negative for free cash. The reason why we haven't been able to move to a AAA sooner is because that's a black mark. And, no one should kid themselves that with you had the town of Brewster, AAA rated, you had a strong, stable manager over there, Charlie Sumner, someone who I've had a lot of dealings with, very good, very competent. And, now they're in a pickle. And I wouldn't be surprised if they lose that AAA bond rating. And it doesn't take much for these markets to kind of get spooked. So, I think bad things are ahead for them. Hopefully we can maintain, I think Charlie having, 30 years of experience plays a big role for that. I'm coming up on 30 myself, so having a consistency and having a plan that makes sense, not only to the taxpayers, but to the board and to Standard & Poor's is important. The thing about Standard & Poor's, and as much as I'd like to say that if I definitely get us to, that number that they're gonna say yes, about 70% of a rating comes from the demographics of a community. And that 70% ratings for the community, we do very well with equalized valuation. So we're one of the most affluent communities for land value. Income, we're not. So there's a lot of retirees, their income is not as high. So you have kind of a dichotomy. What really makes a difference, I believe, for Standard & Poor's is on the request for debt exclusion, how many have passed and what is, let's not kid each other. Standard & Poor's is only interested in our ability to pay. If you borrow money, you have to have a strong ability to pay. So for them, I think we've had debt exclusions, probably about 20 or so in the time that I've been here, and I think all except for 1 or 2 have been voted. It's that history of strong community support for the government that has a significant role. The demographics, and the income, I don't know if that's going to change. The land values probably will continue to maintain themselves and go higher. But there are about 70% of the factors are reasonably beyond our control.
Well, one, if they keep on moving the goal, okay, that delta changes. It's tough to get there. But the question is, if we don't do something, it's going to get worse. All I'm saying is there anything that we can control to help get there to meet the requirements?
Yeah, their primary focus.
Let me suggest that.
Yeah.
The next step is what you're after is are there some specific measures that we could be looking at? And I would throw it back to Chris and you guys to come back and maybe, we know generally where we have to go, but maybe you can pick out some specific things, targets for next year and the year after we can go after to help this discussion. And we can, let's do that.
I'll let Dana pick it up. It's his 5 minutes.
Well, it is 1 minute.
I'll only take one. This is Dana DaCosta, Chairman of the Finance Committee. We'll be meeting in the next room right after this. I guess this is a great budget in terms of the best interest of the town government. I myself worry about the best interest of the town's people and their ability to continue to pay. On the 2.5 portion, we spend everything but $5,000. On the free cash portion, we spend everything but $5,000. Now, I know we're putting some of that into reserves and so forth. It just brings everything real tight. In terms of reaching that goal, the AAA, we do as a town have to be stable and do have good practices, but whether we reach AAA or not doesn't matter to me. I don't think the journey so far has been worth the price that the people have had to invest to get to that point. Maybe I can be proven wrong in the future, but to me, we've been having good, stable practices, and that alone has given us good bond ratings, and we've been borrowing at good rates. We've gotten a lot of breaks that way for 20 years, 25 years that I know of. We've been AA, and we've benefited from having good results when we've gone out to bond counsel. So just continuing to have good practices is more important to me as to whether we actually make that AAA or not. I don't want to see us, I saw projections of going to the 14% and then maybe 20%. That ties up a lot of revenue to have it in reserves. I don't think we need to have our reserves that tight. Back in the 90s, they recommended you have 4 or 5%. We're well over that. So I think, to Mike's point, that making some things a little bit tighter, I would like to see our final number, which is just over 70 million, 200 and something. I would like town meeting to vote on a number that's still in the 60s. And I'll be working with the finance committees to try and bring some of these numbers down a little bit. I'm not talking earth-shattering, let's cut all kinds of stuff. And I'm not talking about affecting people, but there are other things that we can do to try and bring some of these numbers. And I'll also be looking for some contribution from the schools. They did not take out for the 8.5 people any of the benefits for those people, but they did put into their budget the benefits, the unemployment compensation needed to pay for them while they're being laid off. That's $200,000. We should be able to recoup some of that from not having to pay their health costs. I know when we took elected town officials off, that was 7 people. That was $98,000 difference in our budget. So 8.5 people certainly affects their budget from that point of view. So I know the finance committee is going to be looking at it. I'm hoping we can bring that number down a little bit and create a little bit higher number than 5,000 in each category. And I think there's the 175 is a new thing on the schools as far as using free cash for that. I think that's an interesting discussion and how we play that out. But I think we look at either that or the E&D, but an interesting approach. Those are my comments for now.
Thank you, Dan. Any other comments? Angela?
In reading the material this afternoon, I had a couple of thoughts to actually ask the selectmen to do something during this period. One of them is to review the free cash selectmen's policy and see if it's still worthwhile, that we still should be doing it, or should we be using the revenue from those departments to reduce the taxes that those departments tend to generate. Also, a couple of weeks ago, the board had a big chat on what you spent, revenue generated, what you spent it on. And obviously, you have, the agreement up there was that you have to spend it where you collect it. So I think we have to take a look at the free cash policy under that piece too. The other thing I think we need to do is improve the transparency that we have. The way we do financing individual departments is very interesting because we really don't cover all the costs. And the only way we've been able to do that over time has been with sources and uses documents that, which you can do quarterly or semi-annually, so you know exactly what was spent on the activities of that department rather than by them spending it. As an example, and I'm giving this one only because it's a simple example. The rec department is in charge of the beaches. They collect the revenue from the beaches. They do all sorts of things for the beaches. They don't clean the beaches. That's done by the DPW. They carry that budget. They don't do anything with the outhouses that are around there. That's done by the DPW. As a matter of fact, they generally don't pay for their own sand. That sand generally comes from the dredging done by the water department, the waterways department. So, but if you have these sources and uses document, you would know what the totals were for what that activity generated. I think there are a lot of things that go on that we say, oh yeah, we've got it covered, but you really don't. That's another thing to look at, and I believe that the finance director can do those projects. It's not outrageous. And then the other thing, and I guess it ties to the AAA, is adjusting the way we borrow if we can't get to AAA very quickly, because by spending, borrowing for shorter period of times, which is one of the things that AAA wants, it costs us money. If you were borrowing for your house, you're going to borrow for 20 or 30 years. You're not going to borrow for 5 or 10 because it costs too much. There were a couple of people at the meeting in January up in Boston, the MMA, one from Hilltop Securities, another one from Rockland Trust, who I happen to have some cards from and chatted about that whole subject, about the timing of borrowing. There's a lot of opportunities perhaps to borrow differently than we do. So if anybody wants, and they are willing to come and chat.
We use Hilltop Securities already.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why I spoke.
So we can explore some of that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Angela. Don?
Yeah, actually, just go further on what Angela was talking about. I'm not, the chair has brought up in the past trying to source expenses
Revenue.
in revenue if somebody does something to cover something for somebody else. I understand that. I still feel I'm not going to get to that point because it's a government, but we have a lot of revolving funds. And it seemed to me, and I would love have an agenda item on those, because it appears to me that the belief structure is if that money was generated in my area, that's my money to spend in my area again. But Angela brings up a very good point. That would be to ignore the fact that you couldn't have achieved raising that money without help from somebody else. So in broad stroke, how we approach the disbursements out of these revolving funds needs to be looked at, because it's one happy government. It's not a bunch of fiefdoms. And they really can't be in a position where every fund gets to be expended without central oversight to just the purpose that it was generated at, because you're not capturing that it might not have even been possible without somebody else helping them. But that somebody else has to get a direct appropriation, and they don't get to benefit from that fund. So, I mean, I would really like to have that subject on, across all departments. You know, what revolving funds do we have, and what's the process for disbursement of them, as well as replenishing them, so that we could get into the larger discussion of whose money really is that.
Okay, Chris?
I do think we certainly have that in terms of all the revolving accounts have to be reappropriated every year. And I just want to assure the board that, you know, there are many circumstances, as a for instance, that the rec program operates out of the cultural center, and we added in a fee that goes for some of those indirect costs or those costs related to the operation. So we have been trying to capture some
But
of
if we had that as an
beyond-
agenda item so that we could actually go through it
Yep.
step by
Okay.
step, because it's daunting. There's a lot of moving parts here. But
Okay.
there's a lot of money, too.
Thank you, Don.
We certainly could look at that.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. Did you?
Nope.
Good job. Good presentation. A lot of material. We can think about that as we sleep tonight. Moving on to the next item on the agenda, Carol Coppola talked to us about debt impact on existing and proposed projects. I think actually this was initiated a discussion a couple of weeks ago and decided it wasn't properly agendized, if that's the English.
Good evening. I guess it's a night about numbers. So I'm sorry I have to go after the budget because I might have had more of your attention. But we're going to talk about debt, I guess. My understanding is that you wanted to dig a little deeper into the capital plan, tax impacts. You want to look at numbers. You want to look at charts. You want to see average. You want to see median. I have it all for you. Okay. I hope I have it all for you. So here is just a simple chart, and I think you've seen one much like this that the town administrator showed you in his budget message. And the blue here shows you what has the town already borrowed. It's been authorized by the voters and has already been borrowed. The projects are essentially complete. The kind of orangish area says, what have we authorized? What have the voters authorized? And we haven't borrowed it yet. And then the green is, what do we propose to the voters, or we anticipate proposing to the voters projects that would be issue general obligation bonds for. And I just did this out through 2029. Certainly my data goes right out into the 50s, 2050s. But just because that's just too much information to put on a page for you, this is what I'm showing you here. The next slide, and the numbers are little. Oh, the numbers are way too little. So I apologize. These numbers, the intention of this was to show you by project, what is the tax impact? Meaning, what is your tax rate going to increase by project for what's in the capital plan? And that goes out, this is going out to 2028. So it shows you here that what is your existing debt? What is the tax rate impact of your existing debt? What's the tax rate impact of your authorized but unissued debt? And then by project, what is the tax rate impact? And so, for example.
And Carol, if I can interrupt, the average family house is at 375 again?
So we're talking, we have average, we have median. We have two different data points here. I actually lost sleep over this a couple of nights of what numbers I'm going to use. So I went back to, what does the assessor publish for data with regard to average values and median values? So both of those are here. So the assessor publishes data that says that the average single value home in the town of Harwich is $541,900. The median single value property, residential property in the town of Harwich is $394,700. The assessor and I had a conversation about, well, what's reasonable? What if we tried to parse out or pull out from the data non-resident information? And what would that look like at that point in time? That's where the $375,000 is coming into play. So for residents, full-time residents, the median value is $374,700. So that's where the quoted 375 is. This is not what I used. I used what the assessor publishes. So I think I should probably go to the next chart because you can't see this, and I'm happy to send this out to anybody that would like this information, and I really do apologize.
Ed?
But I have,
Carol, we have one
Yes.
question here. About
Send it.
send
me.
it?
Yeah.
Sure,
yeah.
absolutely.
It's in the packet, Ed. It's in the packet here.
So here is not much better. But here just shows you by project, what's the tax impact. So, for example, if you look at Lower County Road, if we looked at Lower County Road as an example, if we were looking at average value of residential homes in the town of Harwich, the first year tax impact of Lower County Road is going to be $47.91 for the average value home. If we were to look at a project such as what is on the proposed capital plan, it's a wastewater project, Phase 3A, we're looking at about $113 of a tax impact. So if we move forward here, you have tiny little numbers again, but this is, what if you want to look at median? Is median a better number to use when you're talking about tax rate
I
impact?
think for our use, median probably is better.
Pardon me?
For our use, I think median's probably a little more, usable.
So the town, my understanding is the town of Harwich has always used average. When Cape Cod Technical High School presented their numbers, when they were proposing their project, they used median. So I wanted to present both of them to you, and whichever might, whichever you think is more appropriate. So these numbers, of course they're going to change. They're going to show a lower tax impact because a median residential home in the town of Harwich is, about $395,000. So Lower County Road goes down to about $35, as opposed to the prior figures that I gave you. And then, again, here's another chart for you. It just shows you by project, a median value homes. And then over on the left-hand side, you can see the dollar amounts that would need to be raised to support those projects. Tiny little numbers again. What I provided you here is just a chart to say, if we look at the end, if everything got approved and we looked at the end, how much taxes are we going to raise? Oh, thank you. How much taxes are we going, how much in taxes will we raise? What's the impact for the average versus the median? And just to give you information, this includes Cape Cod Technical High School debt. This includes Monomoy debt. So everything that has been authorized here, it does include. And then I'm just providing you with another chart that supports the total that was on the previous page. And I used median here for no reason. Just used median. I could have changed that data and used average. And it shows you here the dollar amount to be raised and then the tax rate impact, meaning the dollar on the tax rate.
Ed?
I'm happy to answer any questions.
Ed?
Well, just to comment so we're all clear and to brush up my high school math, median is the price of the residential unit that's in the middle of the pack. There's as many above as below, where average is numerically where the half of the assessed value is below that and the other half of...
That's correct. Absolutely.
So there may only be 1,000 units above it and 5,000 below, whereas with median, there's 3,000 above and 3,000 below.
Yeah. That's why I like median in this case. Carol, what's this chart mean? It means we need to raise more taxes to,
This is telling you,
says the tax impact.
right. So the estimated tax rate impact is over on the right-hand side of that screen. So that's telling you how much more they're going to raise and you're going to raise in taxes to support all of these projects that are being presented.
Because the bars don't reach the line, does that mean we need to raise taxes more to get the taxes to raise? Is my question making
It's two charts
sense?
in one, so if you read from
They're
right
not
to
related,
left.
okay. Michael?
Back to the estimated tax impact by projects, line items. Authorized unissued debt. 2019, you're showing $95. 2020, you're showing $175.29. What is that number? What's in that number, the unissued, unborrowed?
So, there's a significant amount of road projects in that number. That's number one. The town has historically paid down the short-term debt, so we'll borrow money short-term to support those road maintenance projects, but then we pay down that debt every year. The benefit of that is we're paying a much lower interest rate. So our short-term interest rate is much lower than long-term bonds. So it all depends on where the market is. So that is a dollar amount that's included in your authorized and unissued. In addition to that, fire station construction, the fire station planning, neither of those have been borrowed yet. Cranberry Valley has not been borrowed yet, the project that's ongoing there now. And then wastewater projects that were approved last year and the ones that were approved in the previous year. We've borrowed $3,035,000 on wastewater projects that have been approved thus far, but the rest of it remains authorized and unissued.
Okay, so where is the 23 million that the town meeting authorized, or 24 million the town authorized for wastewater, and the 7 million on the fire department, 6.5 million?
So I've been working with the town's contractor to look at the timing of all the debt. So knowing that you're not going to borrow $24 million in one, in one single, probably not going to borrow it in one full swoop, I guess I'll say. We time that debt over a period of years, so when the projects are being complete is when we'll take on that debt. So that's why you're not seeing this big lump, right? A big, large increase, because we're intentionally smoothing out that, because we know that what is, the sense of borrowing that money and leaving it in the bank when we haven't expended the funds yet, it doesn't make much sense, especially if we're paying interest on that debt. So you're not going to see a significant spike, if I'm thinking about what you're probably asking.
Yes, it's a very different number than what Chris has, what we've talked about in the CWMP. We were expecting a 400, or at least we talked about and presented a $450 spike going into 2022 on the average family home, just for the wastewater project. Tech school, so I imagine over this 7 or 8 year period, you have the tech school, the fire department, and wastewater, and projected other projects.
Tech school has already borrowed their funds, so those are included with their budget for next year. So that's in our existing debt category. But I just received, about a week ago, the new schedule from CDM Smith of what the borrowing needs, what they anticipate the borrowing needs and the costs will be over the next 20 or so years. And so those I incorporated into this plan as well.
Okay. Thank you, Carol.
Can we get a copy of the CDM Smith borrowing schedule? Okay. Michael?
Well, I've asked that Julie schedule a line item for that for the next couple weeks, because I was a little surprised with the $60 million increase that he showed us last week from 2016 until 2022, from 240 million to 300 million. I'd like to see his detail as well. He sent a very basic letter to us after that meeting. I'd like to see the detail and how he got to it.
Okay. Ed?
So, as I understand it, with the wastewater borrowings on Phase 3, we've qualified for the state
0%.
state revolving fund. Where do we actually borrow those funds from?
The state.
Okay.
We would build those into these formulas.
Okay, so because we're borrowing it from the state and it's at a 0 interest rate, we're actually not going out into the capital markets to borrow that?
Right, but that's correct, but that's reflected in here as well, a 0 interest rate on that project.
Okay.
My understanding is that the revolving loan fund, they go out to the market once a year or once every 2 years. So depending on where we are in that project is when they're going to borrow that money. I've actually split that project into 2 different categories so that anticipating that the town is not going to borrow essentially $25 million in one single issue.
Okay. Chris? and
Well,
then
I
get to
just,
Don.
Michael brings up a great point. When we did the original estimate, that 450, because, I was the one that helped to try to put that together, that was just for the wastewater. Those had assumptions built in that we wouldn't have. As you see this blue line, that's debt falling off. So 450 is 450 for wastewater. There may be 100 or 150 falling off. We also assumed that it was going to be 2% or 4%. I think in the original assumption we did 4%, and now we're at 0. So some of the numbers that have been shown have been kind of worst case scenario. The 240 to 300 million is definitely an issue in terms of just the inflationary factors that go in that, and we definitely need to explain that piece. So we'll get that material.
I'd like to look at a 15-year timeline and see what it's worth in 15 years.
Okay. Any other questions? Don?
Still.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Short memory.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. But I, for one, would also like to see the breakdowns, because we've had discussions with CDM Smith and the DHY discussions too. That it's not just within the context of the Comprehensive Wastewater Management Plan, which everybody keeps hearing as CWMP, that we're talking, because if you had a home and you knew you needed to do something, it's not just how much it's going to be, it's when's the money due. And by doing some of the discussions we're doing now, we're changing the payment due date, which means that the borrowings are going to have to be different. And then there's the 70% of it is our responsibility, no matter who it is that's going to be doing the wastewater treatment, and the 30% that they're showing savings of the 2.4 million. It's hard for me to understand without seeing that document exactly where this is coming and when it is coming. And I made that a real big point when we had our last discussion, that it needs a timeline as much as a dollar line. Because people pay based on when the bill's presented. And if the bill comes sooner, it's irrelevant to them that, in 20 years, you're going to be paying less. Because nonetheless, in this year, I'm paying more. And you need to know that, because we're talking leveling as if this is some arcane discussion. It really has to do with somebody's budget. And that was the whole point of leveling. It wasn't for the town to level its debt. It was for taxpayers to be able to plan over 5 or 10 years, this is coming off and that's going on. That's the level we're talking about. It's not about, well, our bar graph looks great from the town side. It's about coming out of a wallet of a taxpayer.
Okay. So any other questions? Carol, thank you,
Very helpful.
as usual. Moving on to new business. The next item on the agenda is request for approval of the agreement between the towns of Chatham and Harwich with respect to the formation of the regional school district. Chris, you want to lead this, or Terry, are you going to lead this?
I'll defer to Terry for
Mr. Russell?
getting us started.
Thank you, everybody. Hi, Larry. Hello, everybody. For a moment, I forgot what I was here for. How lucky it is just to do your home budget.
Treat it as being an educational experience.
That is true. I'm representing the Monomoy Committee. Everyone else is over in Chatham with Dr. Carpenter reviewing 2020 budget, so I got the lucky straw. So I think this is fairly straightforward. In summary, every 5 years, according to the regional agreement, the school committee and the 2 boards, Selectmen in Chatham and Harwich, need to review the agreement, and then a vote is taken. We have done our task in the past 2 weeks and reviewed the agreement that hopefully you have a copy of. And we have forwarded to you with no recommendations for additions or subtractions other than the original first 2-year transition period comments that was really a cleanup exercise. So I'm really briefly here to have you people either ask me some questions of clarification regarding the agreement and hopefully a vote.
Okay, thank you, Terry. Questions, Don?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Terry, Yeah, I'm right, I believe. There was an attempt made last year to change the plan through both towns, and it did not pass through Chatham.
That's correct.
In that, one of the central points of contention was that that the school committee would not have to return to a town meeting in order to alter the agreement, specifically relative to the use of the elementary schools.
So all depends how you define that, Don.
That was not approved, is what I'm saying.
That was not approved.
All right.
What the intention was to create an addendum or amendment here to allow the Monomoy Regional School Committee to identify an issue that may cause some sort of redistricting of the elementary school, in this case, Chatham.
I get that, but where I'm at is referencing section 9, Roman numeral 9D2, where new text has been added. Debt service costs attributable to the district's elementary schools will be assessed to the member town. And this is the new text. That owns the building, providing that if the regional school district committee reconfigures its elementary schools such that students are no longer assigned based on their town of residence, and it goes on. This is relative to a change in the agreement that was not approved last year. I'm just saying, from my perspective, I can't vote for the overall agreement if this language stays in there, because it presupposes something that hasn't happened yet. You have not received the approval from town meeting in both towns to reconfigure the elementary school, so why would you need new text to talk about assessing the member town relative to something that you don't have the authority to do?
I don't have an answer, Don, for you. I'll have to go back to the committee also.
Okay, that's my major concern.
Yeah.
Right now, I have no problem with that language coming up if it were part of a discussion that included here's how we're going to reconfigure it, and here's the language about how we would do this. But absent the authority to make the reconfiguration, there's no real need to have this text in there.
Okay, Chris?
So maybe, Mr. Chairman, I think in essence, the initial effort here was to get rid of the transition language that's no
Right.
longer necessary.
But this is still in.
I think that, to Don's point, in those original discussions, there was some discussions about the redistricting and how it would be applied. So I think that language did linger in here when perhaps it should have been removed. I just, in terms of, I did have the town attorney, at one point had gone through this and the lease agreement, and we did send the lease to the insurance company, so we do have some changes that we'll be seeking in that. So I just wanted the board to be aware. In the lease for the elementary school, there'll be some changes. That's
But that
not
doesn't change
before.
use, that just is the lease.
Correct.
So
That's
it may
not
make
before.
sense, Terry, to bring this back and answer Don's question.
Obviously. My understanding of item 2 that Don raises
Yeah.
had, and there is some fringe here, but had nothing to do with the recommendation that was defeated at the Chatham Selectmen. And yet I don't have the response or answer as to what this speaks to. So I really can't respond better than
Yeah,
that.
it
So
sounds like we need
it was
time.
not our intention
Yeah.
to include something that would allow the same vote to go forward as it was last year. So my initial comment was nothing was added to this document. So I'll report back.
Okay, and we'll ask Julie and Chris to put it on. What's the urgency on this, time urgency?
Is there an urgency to this?
Yes.
I think this was the date to come forward with this if there was going to be a change at town meeting, which, again, there isn't going to be, so. I'll have someone at central office.
We still have time, though, don't we, to bring this back?
We, just for a reminder, last year, we had put a placeholder in to make and accept these adjustments, so we would have the ability to have this material presented before a town meeting. The placeholder article, I have asked for that to go back in, just so at least we have that. Last year, we IP'd it because there was questions in regards to it.
Okay.
But I think that transition language, I mean, it's no longer needed to have transition language because we've been Monomoy for 5 years.
Correct.
So I think that if this can be, we may want to keep the placeholder for those transition language purposes only.
Is there any possibility of approving everything but that language? I mean, all the transitions, how does that work? Don?
I was actually going to comment, absent this language, I'd be in favor, but I don't want anybody who's listening to this discussion to be misled. This is red-lined and underlined. This is new text. This is not currently there.
Why don't, again, we have a school committee meeting tomorrow evening. So I'll speak to the superintendent
bring it
and
back then.
I'll try to get back through the superintendent to
That's my only
town
objection.
manager and
That one-
reschedule another meeting.
Okay.
I should have gone to Chatham tonight.
Michael?
But to Chris's point, we could put a placeholder in the warrant,
Yeah.
so this doesn't have to wait another year.
Yeah,
Correct, yeah.
and last year Chatham didn't put it on their warrant, so it ran into
So
some
we-
technical
So,
issues.
so we're covered. We have the time to make this, to get this right then.
Okay. Sorry, gentlemen. We'll go from there then.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on then to item B on new business, it's authorization for the town administrator to execute all sewer collection system phase 2 loan and grant documents.
Yeah, just in terms of this, I did watch the meeting last week when I was home, not feeling well. This is not authorizing the administrator to do anything other than when the board awards contracts. So as we move forward with Phase 2, and we award 2 contracts, or whatever the number is gonna be, for $20+ million to do the work in Phase 2, we then go to the state revolving loan fund with that contract in hand. The state revolving loan fund then says, like when you buy a house, you need to sign all these disclosures. So this does not give the administrator any authority at all to approve funding for any of these. It just allows me to administratively sign off on whatever documents they need to achieve that 0% funding, as a for instance.
Is that,
But this doesn't authorize any approvals beyond, other than just administrative sign.
Michael, I think you have some concern, is that?
I think,
accurate?
I do have concern in the language. All Phase 2 loan and grant documents. Why wouldn't we do what we do with everything else? Vote the contract and authorize the town administrator to sign at the time of the loan or at the time of the grant. We have to accept it. Why wouldn't we, why do this now on this project, but we don't do it on anything else?
And this came from the state revolving loan fund people, that they wanted to have a language and an expectation of who's gonna be signing. So that's where this prompted from.
I would argue the same thing. Bring it back. I mean, answer the question that when the board votes the loan or the grant document, which they have to do by charter and policy, that they'll authorize the town administrator to sign. And then where is the document in the packet that states what you just said, Chris? How come I don't see that?
Yeah, he just did the authority to file, which I take it, he being the folks from CDM, got it from the state revolving loan. I can get a clarification. I mean, I don't,
Yeah, why don't you do that then, and we'll see whether it's, okay.
that's what was told to me, though, was that it was strictly administrative. There was no authority for the administrator to award contracts on that.
Okay, so the action will bring that back with some clarification, then we'll decide
Yes.
if we want to move ahead. Item C then, any other comments, by the way? Item C is Cornelius Pond Purchase and Sale Agreement and Conservation Restriction, signed purchase and sale agreement. As I mentioned, going into tonight's meeting, we've voted on executive session to move ahead with the purchase and sale agreement. We asked for additional discussion on the conservation restrictions, so I'll accept a motion for the purchase and sale if anyone wants to move ahead on
We voted in
that.
executive
voted it.
session,
We
so
voted
he's
it.
just reporting out.
We're gonna
Okay,
disclose it when.
it's disclosed then.
The only comment I
Okay.
have on that, Chris, is if, and I did speak to Michael Locke, the executive director, and he said that there is executed signed purchase and sales that were given to Sandy. The packet version doesn't show that they
Doesn't have
signed it. It may have been changed this week, last week when we were gonna take this up. They weren't signed. I just asked that we, before we sign any purchase and sales,
I know you have the signature folder, so we should make sure you have it in the signature folder if that's in fact the case.
just wanna make sure they sign it before we sign it.
I don't think we do actually, Chris.
Okay. We'll have to get that then, Larry. I thought you brought it up.
Okay. D is participation in fiscal year 19 Truro Regional Community Development Block Grant. Approve and authorize the chair to sign.
This is a byproduct of, the town of Harwich is too small to apply for community development block grants on our own. So the last probably 3 or 4 years, we have been doing it with other towns. We had previously done it with just the town of Dennis, and it was Dennis and us, and Dennis was designated as a small mini entitlement is what it's called for community development block grant purposes. So now we are partnering up with Truro, I think it's also Wellfleet and us. And what this does is it allows residents in Harwich to do some improvements to their homes and to get vouchers for daycare related purposes. I believe last year we were successful in obtaining this. So this is just a letter of support.
Michael?
I move that we approve the town of Harwich participation in the FY19 Truro Regional Community Development Block Grant and authorize the chair to sign.
Second.
Any other discussion? Anyone? All in favor?
Aye.
Approved unanimously.
Thank you,
Uh,
Mr. Chairman.
Next item is back to you then, Chris. Preliminary draft of annual town meeting warrant articles.
So, Mr. Chairman, there's 2 things that I guess I'd like to make a suggestion. There, in total, in the draft warrant, there's 72 articles. And we are planning on having an agenda item for going over the warrant in detail over the next 2 meetings. And then I believe it's March 4th, we have the budget calendar in there that has to be finalized. So this will be on for the next 3 meetings. I thought maybe for tonight, just so people have a sense for what's coming, just kind of go through some of these elements. And then, the board can take off or change these as we move forward. But if you would like, I'll just summarize
Please, yeah,
those.
go through some of the critical ones.
So just the first 3 are really just standard articles, report of town offices. It does determine the elected official salaries, which last year were adjusted up. So those elements would be in that article that sets the rate. Article 4 would be the allowance to accept the hotel motel tax. Article 5 would be the town operating budget. Article 6, Monomoy budget. Article 7, Cape Cod Regional. And then 8 would be water, and then 9 would be wastewater or the sewer budget. Article 10.
Chris, can I make a suggestion on 9? We use various terms in wastewater, sewer, wastewater / water, wastewater, and water.
Yeah.
Can we pick one and use it throughout all the various documents? I would suggest wastewater and water.
You may only,
Because it
I
shows up
believe-
in the charter change, it shows up in, I think we should pick one phrase.
yeah, my only hesitation to that is on a water enterprise fund, it's specifically identified in the statute when you determine that fund, that it's a water enterprise fund. And I believe that the statute that allows for a sewer enterprise fund specifically uses the word sewer.
And those are spelled out in the, but
It's in
but where
there.
you can, we have the titles
Where we
and
can, we
stuff.
will.
Well,
I
that's a
understand.
specific reference, but I think where you can, to make it uniform would be good.
I concur. On the capital budget, we have adopt the capital plan. I do have, a sample was left at your places for the simplified version, or if it wasn't, I will forward to you now. It's not super clean, but if you would like to provide some feedback on it, do you have that?
We have. Michael has a question, Chris.
Chris, a couple weeks ago, I asked about the capital plan and whether or not the Board of Selectmen had to vote it, and whether or not we could vote to amend things in out years that are on the capital plan. Projects that we don't support, clearly wouldn't support, have changed our mind to support. Is that topic gonna come up before we vote the capital plan into the warrant?
You guys set the agenda, so if you want it in the agenda.
I asked for it 2 weeks ago, and so I guess the question is, I guess I'm asking
We
again.
can try again. Okay.
Okay. So on the capital, so adopt a capital plan, there is an element where we've been advised by council to have a article for lease purchase agreements. There are several lease purchase agreements that we do in the community, for everything from copiers to vehicles to tasers. So we have a generic article that would determine the ability to do these lease agreements.
If I can add to that, Chris, that came to me as an issue from the golf committee, that they were being forced to, by the change in procurement laws of leasing for a 1 year, whatever, 2 or 3 years. It was
Yeah.
driving their costs up, because they can get it less expensive, they go a 5-year lease, and so it was pretty, and then it affected other departments, but they were
Yes.
particularly concerned about that.
Well, the golf one's a little bit of a challenge because we're trying to switch from gas to electric too, so we're trying to time out that element. On the, this is just under administration, so we have the capital items to be funded by free cash, facility maintenance and repair fund. These are, we group different items. 14 and 15 are to fund snow and ice deficits and the shortfall in any of the budgets. Water Department has 4 requests for capital. Wastewater, we have a provision for Phase 2 wastewater utility easements. The Board of Selectmen, acting as a sewer authority, can determine easements for sewer. We wanted to have some language that would have more general utility easements and private ways, so this is specifically related to private ways. Department of Public Works has 5 articles. Some of those are the equipment, the reconstruction of Lower County Road, purchase of mobile lift, road maintenance, and then the intersection reconfiguration at Chatham Road. The work was done on that, but we did not get that incorporated into the capital budget in a
Chris,
timely
let me
fashion.
interrupt you for a second, let Mike on.
So Chris, you mentioned earlier, and I brought it up, 25 is out of the warrant?
That's when you said it was out.
It's your guys' warrant, so I don't have any funding for it, or I didn't propose any funding, so if you wanted to strike that, that
I think we
is
should
something-
strike it then, there's no funding.
I'm fine with that.
I'd like to strike it.
Okay,
Strike what?
Number 25.
25.
The intersection, I appreciate the efforts to at least study the issue and see what we have for.
It seems like it's needed, but we can't do everything.
And then the only other question is number 23, purchase a mobile lift system. That's nowhere on the capital plan that I can find. Am I missing it? Is that a new item that,
That should be on the capital
it's
plan.
not on the capital plan?
Oh, it's not on the capital plan. I'll refer to the DPW
Oh.
director.
Mr. Hooper?
Thanks, Link Hooper, DPW Director. That came in new this year, Chris. That was so Kyle has the ability to lift fire trucks and our larger trailers, which we currently do not have. It makes doing some of the maintenance activities difficult. This is it's a pretty cool setup where you can use either 2, 4, or 6 of the mobile lifts together. You stick them up, and however big of piece of equipment you want to raise up, you can. Right now, our ability is pretty limited, and Kyle thought this would be a good investment to continue centralized vehicle maintenance.
That is in the capital plan under, 90,475.
What page,
I
Chris?
just, it
Oh,
wasn't registered, that is in there.
I apologize. I thought you meant, was this a new request, or had this been planned out for several years?
It was in the original request. It's under Public Works,
Ah,
mobile lift system for large vehicles. That was for fire and fire vehicles to be able to lift them because they have a little bit of a challenge because of the size of the equipment, to be able to have portable lifting
Gotcha, I
in
see
case
it now.
it broke down.
Thank you.
Okay.
So that was voted on by capital outlay.
Yes, it was.
Thank you.
Sorry for the confusion, I just.
I didn't see it. Thank you.
Ed, you had a comment?
No.
Question? Okay, Chris?
Okay, zoning and planning, so the single-family dwelling, accessory apartment, the freestanding portable signs, retaining walls for septic system, special provision for lifting existing structure to new appropriate elevations, and provide funding for update of the local capital plan. I believe the board has already voted for the planning board to do the hearing on the first 4, and then the last one is a capital item. Library has a,
It's the local comprehensive plan, not the local capital plan.
yeah, I'm sorry, did I say capital?
Capital, yeah.
It's comprehensive in front of
That's
me.
okay, we're reading it.
I'm sorry, I just, in Article 31, fund library technology. The golf has 2 capital-related articles. The cemetery, we did receive a request to try to group the cemetery. I think we've tried to group that together somewhat. but to amend cemetery rules and regs, complete the construction of the pet burial ground, and the cemetery arboretum project for mapping and software. On solar, we did receive a request from Liz Argo on Friday. As I understand it, solar that is done on a roof can be awarded by the selectmen. Solar that is ground mounted needs to be town meeting approved. So we have a provision to do that.
And where's that on here?
It's 37.
No,
It may be,
not on
it was
ours.
just added.
It's
so
not,
my-
you need to add that then.
My apologies, we did.
Then
just add
38 is
that.
the charter amendment article.
I thought she left at your place as the most recent version.
Oh, she may have. I'm looking what was in our packet.
Oh, yes, solar voltaic energy systems.
There you go. We left it at your places, hot off the presses.
Okay.
On the, let's see what page I'm
So
on.
is that for a specific project?
We have several locations in town that we're working with CVEC to apply for. I'm trying to think of the ground mounted. I think at the public safety building, near the ground mounted that we already have there, at the golf course, adjacent to the cart barn, there's a section where we could do photovoltaic there. I did go as a, for instance, I did go to planning board. They did ultimately vote to recommend the clearing of the land and prepping the site next to the landfill. So that, I don't know if, that was the as of right, that was approved last year. So I don't believe you have to go for that element, other than we may have to go for the lease, the length of the lease. But that language tries to cover that, those elements related to borrowing for solar, or doing solar projects. The next grouping is Massachusetts General Law, Charter Bylaw amendments, so water to wastewater. There were a couple of amendments that we received. I was hoping maybe that Dawn could help us with that. They came through from the Charter Committee on capital overlay plan amendments, and then to clarify ex officio members. So we got some material, which I think we put in the package for you, so that is in there. On land matters, funding the Affordable Housing Trust is in there, actually, plus on the Affordable Housing Trust, there is a recommendation to convert some of the properties from general municipal use to housing trust use.
Michael?
Chris, when are we gonna go over those parcels so we know where they are and what they are and how they were taken?
Yeah, what I'd like to do is, if I can get some feedback from you guys, I will group them. You know, so we have, you know, half in the next meeting and half in the meeting after, however you want to group them, to go over the details of each of these.
For instance, the Earl Road property mentioned is under the care and custody of and control of the Rec Commission.
Yeah, we are having all the properties be reviewed by council. If we're not able to convert from rec to affordable housing, then we won't put that forward. But that's currently under review by the attorney.
Don? Yeah, okay.
And then Article 42 is the approval of an easement. We will have several easements for Verizon and Eversource for the different locations. This one is for the Fire Station 2. We will ultimately probably have one for Saquatucket for the easement to get the power into that, as well as potentially up at the golf course if revisions are needed there. On community preservation, I did have in my presentation some of the community preservation articles. So I don't think there's about 9 articles related to, or 7 articles related to that. On the private petitions, I may read through these just so make sure people know that we did receive and we have those in there. So currently, and these numbers will change over time, but Article 51 is to defray the cost of Chase and Harwich Port libraries. That's a standard. Promote the town of Harwich is next. That's through the chamber. That's also a traditional article. Supplement the Mass Cultural Council for local cultural council grants. That also is traditional, so those are 3 traditional ones. I had referred to the budget plan, the Pleasant Bay Alliance. There was a commitment to fund $26,000. 55 is, and these ones are individually submitted by the 10 signatures. So 55 is amend the code of the town of Harwich to prohibit procurement of and disposing of beverages in plastic containers of any size. Again, these are citizen petitions, not necessarily something supported by the selectmen or by administration, but certainly something that the board may want to invite these participants in to see if they want to speak to these. So that may be something that if you want to schedule those as a group. 56, rescind Article 57 of the 2016 annual town meeting regarding the use of the pet burial ground, the property related to the pet burial ground. 57 is refrain from using town funds or resources to enforce federal immigration law. This is strictly advisory. We're at the low end of the food chain when it comes to law, so we don't change federal law, but that is my understanding, advisory. I believe we had a presentation at the last meeting or the meeting before. 58, support for legislation to change the state seal and motto regarding the Indian on the state's seal, which would be just a support. 59, general bylaw to amend to ban the use of single-use plastic straws. 60, amend the Town of Harwich Board of Health regulations regarding flavored tobacco products. And 61 is selectmen's public record votes. I believe we had a person came forward and wanted to have the votes of the Board of Selectmen recorded in the warrant itself. Right now, FinCom is done. And 62, so we have I think this is a banner year for citizen petitions. Amend the Code of Town of Harwich Charter to update the name Selectmen to Select Board is 62. And then really 63 to 70 are revolving stabilization and OPEB funds. So 63 is to create or establish the annual revolving fund for the pet burial ground. 64, amend the code relevant to department revolving funds. Anytime we make a change now, we have to change the bylaw. And then 65, rescind the establishment of the capital infrastructure revitalization fund at Cranberry Valley. I think that's just that's been replaced anyway, so this is clerical. Rescind the authorization for the golf restaurant lease, 53D revolving account, and transfer the balance into the pro shop revolving account. I believe these are the golf people with the finance director trying to clean up some of those. 67, department revolving funds authorization. That is the list with the level of how much can be spent on each one. Stabilization is 68, how much we can contribute into stabilization. 69 is the OPEB trust fund we usually contribute. And Article 70 is fund prior years unpaid bills. I think to date we have about $1,000 of those, fairly small number. And then 71 is the traditional herring fisheries. So whatever the board wants in terms of what you think grouping makes sense.
Give Ed a chance to ask a question. Ed, your question?
Well, is 67 the departmental revolving funds authorization? Is that the one that has the chart?
Yeah, actually, there's two. One of them is 64, in this case, is departmental revolving fund. That's to change the bylaw. So the state law changed about 2 years ago where we have to have a bylaw for every fund that we have. So this is just the bylaw change. And then 67 is the actual limits to what they can bring in.
Well, in writing up both of those, I guess, in both of those articles, I know a number of the revolving funds, when they were authorized, the description of who controlled them and what they were for and blah, 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 were fairly wordy. And then when we decided to put it in a chart, a lot of them were reduced, and somehow in the reduction, half the intent of the original authorization was sort of wiped out. And I want to make sure that when we rewrite all this, that we go back to the original authorizations to make sure all of that language is included.
That's why I want to have that whole discussion.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, we probably could have for the next meeting, the revolving and stabilization, these 63 to 70, I mean, or probably even 71, the herring fisheries isn't usually controversial.
So that's your guidance is, next meeting is,
I think we probably should start picking away at these.
I do. Maybe the way to do that is if you can take your first, well, you think you go first, and I'd ask the other board members to email Julie with items that you think we should attack next week. Because just, Chris, I guess to summarize, in the next 2 weeks, we have to go through this exercise.
Yes. I do think it's important that, as I understand kind of how the charter lays out, whatever you want before town meeting should be before town meeting. If you're uncertain as to whether you want to take a final action or not, I mean, you could certainly leave it on and then just IP it, indefinitely postpone it. So, you know, right now, everything has been provided for, hopefully everything has been provided for, like in the capital plan. That doesn't mean if there's an item that you want taken out of the capital plan, you have really two options. One, you can remove the wording
Or we can IP it.
before the warrant is finalized. And then secondly, you could keep the wording in, and then if, you know, there's not a commitment to do it, then just IP it at town meeting. So there are two bites at the apple in terms of doing this.
And what's the date that we actually have to take a vote?
It's
then?
March 4th is the final. And I just, because last year I added some material, and my intent this year is you're going to see the final warrant, hopefully prior to that March 4th. So my appendix that lays out the capital plan and the funding and so on, we'll have all that material. So there won't be any add-on letters unless we get them in a timely fashion from like the superintendent of schools, and then the board votes the entirety of the warrant at that March 4th meeting.
Is there, Don, what I'm interested in is that we make this as smooth as we can going forward, so, Don?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and that's what I was going to speak to. Whether or not the charter mandated that we hold a meeting last week on Thursday or Friday, it wasn't really the point. Mr. McManus is right. We've waited an awful long time in the past to do this. None of us really want to be sitting here, especially off of last year's experience, at 11:30 at night on March 3rd, or whatever that date
March
might be.
4th.
Well, no, I mean the day before the
before.
deadline.
I'm
And
with
say, okay, but we're obligated to vote everything here. I mean, we really need to do something orderly and soon rather than late.
But we don't have to vote all in one night, we can spread it out, so we need to.
No, but it seems like that's so far away. But March 4th compared to February 11th is not that far away. So,
It's 3 meetings.
yeah,
I mean, it's not many.
that's kind of what I'm saying. We really want to like I'd like to front load it. I'd like to be able to do
Do
things
all we
earlier
can.
rather than later, and then whatever's left over that's contentious, we can
I
talk
mean, the
about.
nice thing we did, Mr. Chairman, is and I have to thank Bob and Carol, you know, for kind of helping me, but we have a lot of these articles drafted up. John Giorgio has taken a look, at least a first crack at going through them. So we have the material for the board to deliberate. The final numbers, like on the budget and so on, may pend a little bit later, but we do have a lot of the wording complete.
Did you have a question, Michael, or comment?
Just a good block of time for the next 3 meetings to start at number 1 and work our way through the list.
I would,
I don't think I would bounce it around.
No, there's either one of two things. We either have to take a substantial portion of those regular meetings and say we're going to put off other things that
there's-
don't necessarily have
okay.
to be there,
So I think-
or we're going to have extra meetings.
So I think conclusion is we'll front load as much as we can next week.
Okay.
The week after, I'm actually out of the country, so.
How convenient.
I mean, maybe where there's 70 of them, I'll just do half and half, so that way everything
Okay.
gets a crack at it before.
Okay, Ed,
Yeah, you know, to Don's point,
whoever he is.
you know,
Him.
you know, part of the problem is we've moved this whole process back a month. But in my first year as a selectman with Don as chairman, we reviewed the articles in December
In January, and then we're done.
and had principally completed the review of the articles before they were due. on the second Friday of January at that point. So then it allowed a very leisurely process to have hearings with the people who proposed it, to get it to legal counsel for analysis, and decide whether or not the budget could accommodate it, to decide whether there was support amongst the board and elsewhere in the community for the article. And then, by the time the beginning of March came around, we'd have a meeting and we'd put the final warrant together and drop out those articles that weren't making the cut. And it was a very
Maybe we need to go back
measured
and discuss
and
that.
thoughtful
but-
process.
But now we need to move forward with this and
Yeah.
maybe.
But we
next
could
time
add more
can-
meetings, is what I'm saying, or take off things that don't necessarily
Okay,
absolutely positively have to be there for the next 3 weeks.
but we can start.
And I think I wouldn't limit the agenda item, Chris. I think we should vote on some or all and just leave it that way. That way, if we want to bounce around, we can bounce around. If we
Yeah,
get
list them
past
all.
number 35, we may as well continue to go if we have time. But I wouldn't limit the
We'll see
agenda
where we
item.
go.
Just for the board, I mean, it seems to me on the private petitions, we obviously have to invite guests in to have them do a presentation with the board. Do you want that as soon as we're able to get them in?
Go ahead, I have
We do have a
We will.
larger number than normal.
In past years, we always did that after, because there was no ability for us
No
to
ability
change
to
You
change
can take a
it.
position,
or
but you
to
can't
remove
vote.
it.
we don't
but,
have a lot of
yeah,
influence
yeah.
on those, so I would
Yeah.
be with
Yeah, that's a
that.
good point.
Yeah,
So we
but
could do
right,
those,
position, you can't
After
vote.
we do our.
do that
yeah.
after the March 4th. Thank you.
Okay, enough on that. The next item is,
Larry.
sure, please.
Briefly, Barbara Panadosi, and thank you for looking at the warrant articles for the pet burial ground to try to bundle them together. And I know typically the citizens petitions get put at the end. I would suggest that maybe number 56 would get put ahead of 35 as you bundle them together, because if that's voted yes, it makes the other part that's going to cost taxpayers mute,
Okay.
so it wouldn't matter.
Okay. We can put that down when we go through the items next week and when we vote on them.
Okay, thank you.
We have some, we
Yeah, I
have
hate to
some
have
time.
people get locked into these numbers, because these numbers will change a couple times
Yeah.
between now and, but we'll look at
But
doing
we'll have a
it.
chance to explore that. F is request the Yankee sprinkler to waive the fire protection fee for work to be done at the Harwich Fire Station. I would certainly accept a motion on this.
So moved.
Is there a
Second.
second?
Second.
Discussion, or all in favor?
Aye.
Carried. Contracts, I don't think we have anything on contracts, Chris, do we?
No.
Wastewater project manager, I see we have a copy, RFP is, I think we're mainly interested in the schedule.
Yeah, actually, I thought that the board had kind of already voted this.
I thought we
Julie-
did, too.
Julie remembered a little bit differently, so she wanted me to put it back on.
We-
So I
We
was ready
we
to
voted
kinda-
for it, I think, okay, thank you, Sharon.
I'll get
It's
it
in her
out, but
spreadsheet.
So now all
I
that matters
just-
is we actually get somebody.
I know, there's no sense in,
Chris, I think
Going out
I'm more
twice.
interested in just where we are in terms of
Yeah, I was-
moving forward.
I was gonna send it out, and then Julie said that she didn't remember the board voting it.
Okay,
So I did not send it out because I wanted to see tonight. It's unfortunate that she wasn't able to make it. I mean, if the board wants me, I mean, I'm happy to vote.
Yeah,
I'm
somewhat.
sorry, I'm happy to send it out.
I think it's been voted on as that, so
Aye.
I think, go ahead and move on it.
We'll try to get it out by
Unless there's,
We'll try to get it out by
anyone objects to
Wednesday,
that.
this coming Wednesday. We'll try to
Okay.
finalize it.
Departmental reports?
Under, you mean town administrator report, I think I've said more than enough tonight, so I'm not gonna have any comments
Okay.
beyond.
Thank you, Chris. Selectmen's report. Michael, I'll start with your side.
As promised, I said I wouldn't go on tirades about social media anymore, but I just want to clarify one of the accusations against me this weekend. My mother is on the cemetery commission. I did call state ethics, and there is certainly no conflict. And I would point out, I believe the name is, the gentleman that called me out on it was Brian. To Brian, I know he's late in the crusade against the pet cemetery, but if he had watched back, I've disclosed this more than once at this point. And he would also know that my mother wasn't part of voting anything to do with the pet cemetery, that she came on after this was voted by the board, finance committee, and went to town meeting. So no conflict, and now it has been presented again. No conflict. And yes, it's a close family member. It's my mother.
Thank you, Michael. Ed?
Nope, I'm not going to comment.
Don?
In the spirit of Chris, I have no comment.
Anyone care to move it? We adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
Second. All in favor?
Yeah.